My phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. "Sis, Dad died last night," my sister said coldly. "He left everything to me and my husband. You get absolutely nothing." My brother-in-law laughed in the background. "Finally, you are out." I put the call on speaker. Dad was sitting right beside me, sipping his black coffee. He leaned toward the phone to listen as they continued to dig their own graves. Before I reveal what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch greedy family members show their true colors. I am Maya, 30 years old, and I am the proud black sheep of the Jenkins family. My family built a highly lucrative commercial real estate empire right here in Atlanta, Georgia. We specifically focused on the historic Cascade Heights neighborhood. For decades, my father, Marcus Jenkins, was a massive pillar of the community. He was a self-made billionaire who firmly believed in uplifting our people and preserving our cultural legacy. My older sister, Sienna, on the other hand, only believed in uplifting herself. At 33 years old, she was the undeniable golden child. Sienna was obsessed with social media high society status, and her white husband, Chad Sterling. Chad loved to pretend he was a genuine ally to the culture. He threw around slang he learned on the internet and wore his association with our prominent black family like a shiny accessory. But behind closed doors, he was a greedy, condescending gold digger who only saw my father as a giant automated teller machine. I had spent my entire life being heavily criticized for not conforming to their superficial money-driven standards. I proudly graduated from Spelman College, built my own independent career in private equity, and completely refused to play their toxic family games. That Tuesday morning began like any normal day, until my phone shattered the quiet peace of my living room when I saw Sienna's name flash on the bright screen at exactly 7:30. My stomach immediately tightened. My sister and I never spoke this early in the day. I answered the call, and before I could even say a simple hello, her voice cut right through the line. It was sharp and completely devoid of any normal human emotion. "Dad died last night," she announced, just like that. There were no tears in her voice. There was no hesitation. There was absolutely no attempt to soften the devastating blow for her younger sister. Before my brain could even fully process the weight of those horrible words, she just kept going. Her tone rapidly shifted from a tragic announcement to a sickening victory speech. The doctors at the hospital said it was a massive heart attack. It was very quick. "But listen, Maya, we have some serious business to handle right now." Dad updated his financial directives before he passed. He left the entire Jenkins estate and all the voting shares to me and Chad. "You get absolutely nothing, not a single cent." I sat completely still on my cognac leather sofa. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just listened to the sheer audacity of my own flesh and blood, prioritizing a real estate portfolio over the supposed death of our father. Then I heard the sound of the phone shuffling, and Chad grabbed the receiver. I could hear the smug, disgusting satisfaction oozing from his voice. "Hey there, little sister," he chimed in, using that overly familiar, condescending tone he always reserved exclusively for me. "Look, it is a terrible tragedy about Marcus, truly. But we need to talk about that company apartment you are currently living in. Since Sienna and I are officially running the show now, we are liquidating all the non-essential assets. Your free ride is officially over. You have exactly 3 days to pack up your little Spellman memorabilia and get out of our property. Maybe you can go find a nice affordable place in a different neighborhood. You know, somewhere much more suited to your actual income level. It is time you pull yourself up by your bootstraps like the rest of us hardworking folks." The glaring irony of a man who married into generational black wealth telling a hardworking black woman to pull herself up by her bootstraps was almost comical. Chad had not worked a real corporate job in over 5 years. He survived entirely on the generous monthly allowance my father gave Sienna. Yet here he was, barely 12 hours after his father-in-law supposedly passed away, flexing a level of power he had never earned. He was throwing around racist, classist microaggressions like confetti, completely drunk on his new perceived authority. I took a slow, deep breath, letting his massive arrogance hang heavily in the air between us. 3 days, Chad, I asked, keeping my voice incredibly steady and icy cold. You are evicting your grieving sister-in-law before we even have a chance to plan the funeral arrangements for my father. It is just business, Maya, he replied smoothly, clearly enjoying every second of his unearned power trip. There is nothing personal about this at all. We have a massive commercial real estate empire to transition today, and the board is expecting strong leadership. We simply cannot be bogged down by family charity cases or emotional dead weight anymore. Sienna chimed back, in her voice dripping with fake, sickening sympathy that made my skin crawl. We will send you the details for the memorial service once Chad and I decide on a proper high-class venue that reflects our new status. Do not cause a scene like you always do, Maya. Just pack your things quietly, hand over the keys to the doorman, and leave us to handle the adult responsibilities. I smiled, a cold, hard smile, staring straight ahead. No worries at all, I told them softly, making sure my voice betrayed absolutely zero emotion. I completely understand how you want to play this. I pulled the phone away from my ear just a fraction of an inch and tapped the speaker icon. The small, glowing button illuminated the center of my screen, broadcasting Chad and Sienna's arrogant breathing across the quiet expanse of my living room. The camera, if this were a movie, would slowly pan to the right, gliding past the custom mahogany bookshelves and the collection of modern black art I had curated over the years. It would steadily settle on the oversized armchair near the window, where a figure sat completely concealed behind the morning edition of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The newspaper slowly lowered, revealing my father, Marcus Jenkins, very much alive and looking sharper than ever. He was wearing his signature tailored navy suit trousers and a crisp white dress shirt, his silver hair perfectly brushed. He took a deliberate, unhurried sip from his ceramic mug. His dark eyes, the exact same shade as mine, locked onto the phone resting on the glass coffee table. The air in the room was thick with a dangerous kind of anticipation. He set the mug down with a soft clink that echoed ominously over the open line. Chad, my father said, his rich baritone voice rolling through the speaker like a slow-moving storm. I find it absolutely fascinating that you are making plans to evict my youngest daughter from a property she purchased with her own private capital. Furthermore, I find it incredibly bold that you are attempting to liquidate the Jenkins estate, while the founder of said estate is currently sitting in his daughter's living room, drinking a very excellent cup of dark roast coffee. The silence that blasted through the phone speaker was not just quiet. It was a suffocating, terrified, absolute void. It was the sound of a predator suddenly realizing it had just walked directly into a steel trap. I could practically hear the blood freezing in Chad's veins. I could vividly picture Sienna standing in her lavish penthouse, her designer phone slipping from her manicured fingers, the color completely draining from her carefully contoured face. Dad, Sienna finally choked out. The word was a pathetic, high-pitched squeak stripped entirely of the vicious confidence she had wielded just seconds before. Her voice trembled so violently, it sounded like she was standing outside in a blizzard. "You are the hospital called us. The doctor said exactly what he was paid to say." My father did not yell. He did not need to. His quiet authority was far more terrifying than any scream could ever be. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the phone as if he could see straight through the digital connection and into their rotten souls. "You really thought I would hand the keys to a generational black empire over to a man who resents the very people who built it?" My father asked softly. "You thought I was blind to the way you look at our community, Chad. You thought I was just a senile old checkbook waiting to expire so you could pave over my legacy. And you, Sienna, my own flesh and blood. You could not even wait 24 hours to start picking the meat off my bones. You threw your sister to the wolves before my imaginary body was even cold." There was a sharp clattering sound on the other end, like a glass shattering against a marble floor, followed by the frantic sounds of Chad trying to scramble for an excuse. "Marcus, sir, please listen to me. There has been a massive misunderstanding here. We were grieving, and we were trying to secure the business assets during a time of extreme crisis. It was a protective measure. I swear to you, we were only trying to protect your legacy. Do not ever speak the word legacy to me again," my father commanded, slicing through Chad's pathetic rambling. "You have no concept of what that word means. Enjoy your morning, Chad." I have a feeling the rest of your day is going to be incredibly stressful. My father reached over and tapped the red button on my screen. The line went dead, cutting off Chad's desperate, stammering apologies. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the betrayal settling heavily in the room. My father leaned back in his chair, running a tired hand over his face. He looked at me, a profound sadness mixing with the fierce pride in his eyes. Now I know exactly what you are thinking. Why would a billionaire real estate mogul fake his own death on a random Tuesday morning? Why would we go through this elaborate, dramatic charade just to scare my sister and her terrible husband? Let me break the fourth wall for a second and bring you up to speed. We did not fake my father's death just to teach Sienna a lesson about sibling loyalty or to humble Chad. We did it because we were dealing with a massive, highly coordinated financial crime. At exactly 3 o'clock this morning, my private security software triggered a critical alert. I managed the shadow accounts for the Jenkins estate, a fact my father kept strictly confidential, entirely separate from the public-facing board of directors. My phone alarmed me that an unauthorized wire transfer of $5 million was actively being drained from my father's personal offshore holding account. The routing numbers pointed directly to a series of untraceable shell companies located in the Cayman Islands. I immediately bypassed the security protocols and traced the digital signature back to its origin. The transfer was initiated using my father's master access codes that are kept in a biometric safe inside his private study. Only 3 people in the world know the location of that safe: me, my father, and Sienna. I drove straight to my father's estate in the middle of the night, bypassing his security team, and woke him up. When we checked the safe, the physical ledger containing the master codes was gone. There was no forced entry. The security cameras showed Sienna and Chad entering the house at midnight, claiming they needed to retrieve some legal documents for an upcoming charity gala. They did not just steal $5 million. They initiated a total systematic drain of the estate's liquid assets. The $5 million was just the test run, the first drop in the bucket before they attempted to siphon everything. But they needed my father out of the picture to activate the forged power of attorney documents Chad had secretly drafted. They needed a medical emergency to lock down the accounts and take total administrative control. So we decided to give them exactly what they wanted. We gave them a tragedy. We gave them a dead billionaire. We set the bait to see exactly how far they were willing to go, how deep their treason truly ran, and who else they had bought off to execute this hostile takeover. The answer was worse than we ever imagined, and it started at Emory Hospital just 24 hours ago. If this were a movie, the camera would currently be positioned just over my shoulder. You would see the sharp, tailored lines of my father sitting across from me, and then with a slow, deliberate blur, his living room would dissolve into the blinding white fluorescent lights of Emory Hospital exactly 24 hours earlier. The persistent rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor would fill your ears, setting a tense mechanical heartbeat for the chaos that was about to unfold. My father had suffered a mild myocardial infarction, a warning shot from his heart telling him to slow down. I had been sitting in that freezing hospital room since 2 o'clock in the afternoon, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. He was resting comfortably, heavily medicated but stable. The crisis had passed. Then the heavy wooden door to the VIP cardiology suite swung open with enough force to bang against the wall stop. Enter Sienna and Chad. They did not rush in with the panicked fear of a daughter and son-in-law terrified for their patriarch. They strolled in like they were arriving late to a cocktail party they did not even want to attend. Sienna was wearing a full face of glam makeup and a silk trench coat that cost more than most cars. She did not look at the heart monitor. She did not look at the IV line taped to my father's hand. She looked directly at her Rolex. "I cannot believe this is happening right now," Sienna announced, her voice echoing loudly off the tiled floor. She let out a massive theatrical sigh, dropping her designer leather bag onto the visitor chair I had just vacated. "I have a fitting for the spring gala at 4 o'clock, Maya. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get Francois to fly in from New York? I had to bribe his assistant just to get a window. And now I am standing in a hospital smelling like rubbing alcohol and cheap cafeteria food." I stared at her, my blood heating up. "Our father just had a heart attack, Sienna." I kept my voice low, mindful of the sleeping man. "They had to put a stent in his artery. But please tell me more about how your tailored gown is suffering. Sienna rolled her eyes. Oh, spare me the self-righteous daughter routine, Maya. He is fine. Look at him, he is literally sleeping. You always overreact to everything. Chad stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder. He was wearing his usual uniform, a quarter-zip cashmere sweater, and the smug smirk of a man who believed he owned every room. He looked down at my father with an expression that looked far more like assessment than concern. Sienna is right, Chad chimed in, his tone dripping with fake calm. We need to be rational about this. Marcus is getting older. These episodes happen. The real issue here is stability. The market does not like instability, Maya. If word gets out that the head of the Jenkins estate is incapacitated, our stock valuations will take a hit. We have shareholders to think about. I stood up, stepping closer. He is not an episode, Chad. He is a human being. He is my father, and he is certainly not incapacitated. Chad laughed, shaking his head. Come on, Maya. Let us be realistic. He is a 65-year-old black man with high blood pressure and a failing heart. The statistics are not in his favor. Someone needs to step up and ensure the business operations transition smoothly before the vultures start circling. You are the only vulture I see circling. I shot back, my voice slicing through the sterile air. You have been waiting for him to stumble for 5 years so you could finally get your hands on the steering wheel. Sienna pushed past Chad, stepping right into my face. Watch your mouth when you speak to my husband, she hissed, her pristine facade cracking to reveal the bully underneath. Chad is thinking about the family's future. Something you know nothing about since you contribute zero to this legacy. You sit in your rented apartment and play finance with your little startup funds, while Chad and I manage the real money. Your husband does not manage anything, Sienna. I kept my gaze locked on hers. He plays golf on Tuesdays and spends my father's money on Thursdays. The only thing Chad manages is how quickly he can swipe his corporate credit card. Sienna raised her manicured finger, pointing dangerously close to my eyes. You are just jealous. You resent the fact that Dad trusts us to handle the public face of the company. You think just because you got a degree from your little local college that you understand how elite wealth works. You lack the polish, Maya. You lack the vision. I almost laughed at the sheer blinding arrogance. She had no idea that my little local college was Spelman, an institution that produced women who ran circles around her entire existence. She had no idea that the startup funds I managed were actually a billion-dollar private equity firm that I built from the ground up. She only saw the scapegoat. I am not jealous of a woman who needs her daddy's credit card to buy her personality, I replied, keeping my tone deadly calm. And I am definitely not jealous of a man who needs his wife's last name to get a meeting. Chad's face flushed. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, he snarled, dropping the Progressive Ally Act. You are completely out of your depth. When the board finds out about his condition, they are going to want a transition of power. And they are not going to look at the angry antisocial sister. They are going to look at us. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I am going to make sure the board knows exactly how unstable he really is. By the end of the week, I will have his medical records declared proof of diminished capacity. And once I have the power of attorney, I am wiping you off the payroll, out of the properties, and out of the trust. You are nothing. I stared at him, letting his threat hang in the air. I did not flinch, because right at that moment a sharp cough came from the hospital bed. My father's eyes were open. He was awake, and he had heard every single word. The sharp sound of my father coughing broke the tension in the room, but Chad did not give my father a chance to speak. Panic flashed across Chad's pale face for a fraction of a second. Before my father could fully open his eyes or form a coherent sentence, Chad lunged forward. His hand clamped down hard around my upper arm. His grip was tight, desperate, and entirely too aggressive. He yanked me backward, pulling me away from the hospital bed and dragging me forcefully toward the exit. The heavy wooden doors of the VIP cardiology suite swung open, and he shoved me out into the blindingly bright, sterile hospital hallway. If you were watching this unfold through a camera lens, this is exactly where you would see a tight close-up tracking shot. The lens would stay locked on our faces, capturing the frantic movement as we spilled out of the room. You would see the artificial fluorescent lights reflecting off the sweat suddenly forming on Chad's forehead. You would see the absolute disgust radiating from my own eyes. Chad slammed the door shut behind us, cutting off the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. He backed me against the cold plaster wall, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. He leaned in so close I could smell the expensive, overpowering cologne he used to mask the scent of stale liquor from his mandatory business lunches. "You need to shut your mouth!" Maya Chad snarled, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. His progressive, culturally aware mask had completely melted away, leaving behind the entitled, arrogant predator I always knew he was. "You think you are so smart because you read a few financial blogs and manage some insignificant community funds. But you have absolutely no idea how the real world operates. This is high-level corporate transition. This requires a pedigree. This requires an Ivy League understanding of global markets, not some glorified charity degree from Spelman College." He spat out the name of my beloved alma mater like it was an insult. He thought he was striking a fatal blow. He thought belittling a historically black college would suddenly make me bow to his supposed intellectual superiority. "My degree from Yale actually means something in boardrooms, from New York to London." Chad continued, practically vibrating with unearned confidence. "When investors look at the Jenkins estate, they need to see a face they can trust. They need a steady, educated hand. They do not need an angry, socially inept diversity hire trying to play CEO. You are a liability. Your entire existence is a liability to this family wealth. I am the only reason the board will not immediately liquidate the stock the second they find out your father is physically compromised." I did not shrink away from him. I did not break eye contact. I stood perfectly still, letting his racist, classist garbage hang in the air. I let him revel in his delusion for exactly 3 seconds before I systematically dismantled his entire identity. I carefully reached up and removed his hand from my arm, peeling his fingers back with a calculated slowness that made him blink in confusion. "Your degree from Yale," I said, my voice echoing with icy, terrifying calm. "Down the empty corridor is a very expensive piece of paper. Specifically, it is a $2.5 million piece of paper. That is exactly the amount your father donated to the Alumni Association in the form of a newly renovated library wing just 3 weeks before your deeply below average SAT scores were miraculously accepted by the admissions board." Chad stepped back, his jaw clenching. The sudden drop of specific financial figures caught him completely off guard. "You want to talk about boardrooms, Chad? Let us talk about them." I continued, taking a step forward and forcing him to retreat. "My degree from Spelman was earned through blood, sweat, and academic excellence. I graduated summa cum laude while you were on academic probation during your junior year because you could not pass a basic macroeconomics seminar without paying someone else to write your final paper. You think I am just playing finance with community funds. What you do not know is that my network of Spelman sisters currently controls more institutional capital in the city of Atlanta than your entire family has seen in 3 generations." He opened his mouth to argue, but I did not give him a single inch of breathing room. I hit him with the next layer of truth, striking directly at his fragile, over-leveraged bank accounts. "You love to parrot around, Buckhead, acting like you are the great white savior of the Jenkins empire," I said, my voice sharp and unforgiving. "You want everyone to believe you married Sienna because you love her culture and you respect our legacy. But I know exactly why you married my sister. You married her because the Sterling family hedge fund has been bleeding money for 6 years. Your father is currently leveraging properties he does not even own to cover margin calls. Your family is drowning in toxic debt, Chad. You are completely bankrupt in every sense of the word." The blood drained entirely from his face. His eyes darted nervously up and down the hallway, terrified that a passing nurse or doctor might overhear the absolute destruction of his financial facade. "Sienna is your bailout plan," I told him, dropping the final crushing reality on his head. "You do not love her. You love her trust fund. You need my father to be declared medically incompetent because you desperately need access to the Jenkins estate liquid assets to save your own father from federal indictment. You think you are playing a brilliant game of corporate chess, but you are just a desperate broke man who had to marry into black wealth to survive." Chad was trembling now. The veins in his neck pulsed visibly under his collar. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. He had spent his entire life coasting on the privilege of his skin color and his purchased credentials, assuming that a black woman from a local college could never see through his sophisticated accounting tricks. He had grossly underestimated my intelligence, my resources, and my relentless protective instinct over my family's money. "You listen to me," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his exposed lies. "I have the power of attorney paperwork already drafted. Sienna is going to sign it. The board is going to approve it. You cannot stop this transition. You have no actual power in this company." I smiled. It was the same cold, unbothered smile I would use 24 hours later in my living room when the trap finally snapped shut. "I do not need power in the company, Chad," I whispered, stepping right into his personal space. "I own the board. I own the debt your father holds. And by the time you figure out how I did it, you will not even have enough money left to buy a bus ticket out of Atlanta." I turned my back on him, refusing to engage any further. I walked down the sterile hospital hallway, my heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. I left him standing there, completely paralyzed by the realization that the angry antisocial sister he had mocked was actually the architect of his impending doom. He thought he was hunting a sheep. He had no idea he had just locked himself inside a cage with a lion. I pulled my phone from my pocket as I walked toward the elevators. It was time to initiate the final phase of the plan. It was time to let my father die, at least on paper, and watch the parasites feast on the poisoned bait. I did not press the elevator button. My finger hovered over the glowing panel, but my instincts, sharpened by years of navigating predatory venture capitalists, screamed at me to stop. Chad was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always make immediate, desperate moves. Instead of going down to the lobby, I quietly pivoted on my heel and slipped into the adjacent service corridor, wrapping back around toward the VIP wing. If the camera were capturing this moment, it would shift into a tight voyeuristic perspective. You would be looking right over my shoulder, peering through the 2-inch crack of a heavy unlatched door, leading into a dimly lit family consultation room. The shot would be framed by the dark vertical lines of the door and the door jamb, making the audience feel like they were holding their breath right alongside me, spying on a crime in progress. Through that narrow sliver of visibility, I saw Chad. He was pacing like a madman across the small room. The arrogant, untouchable Ivy League facade he had worn just 5 minutes ago was completely gone. He was sweating profusely, dragging his hand through his perfectly styled hair, leaving it a disheveled mess. His expensive leather shoes squeaked sharply against the linoleum as he marched back and forth. He held his phone crushed against his ear, his knuckles turning white from the pressure. "Listen to me, Dr. Aris. Do not give me that medical ethics garbage right now," Chad hissed into the receiver, his voice dripping with venom and panic. "We had an agreement. I wired the first $200,000 into your Cayman account yesterday. You will get the remaining $300,000 the second this is finalized. But I need the timeline accelerated. I cannot wait until the weekend. I need Marcus declared medically incapacitated or deceased tonight." I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the hallway, my heart pounding a steady, icy rhythm against my ribs. I slid my phone out of my pocket, silently activated the voice recorder, and held the microphone up to the crack in the door. "The audience gets a front row seat to his absolute greed, captured in crystal clear, high-definition audio." "The old man just woke up," Chad growled, pacing furiously toward the window and then spinning back around. "If he speaks to the board, my entire angle is completely dead. You need to sedate him, put him in a medically induced coma. Tell Sienna his heart is failing. Tell her whatever medical jargon you need to justify it. I do not care. But I need the official time of death stamped at exactly 11 o'clock tonight." There was a pause as the corrupt doctor on the other end murmured something in response. Chad let out a harsh, barking laugh that held zero humor. "Because of the international banking window, you absolute idiot!" Chad snapped, exposing the precise mechanics of his financial treason. "The forged power of attorney documents are already notarized. I paid top dollar to get the seals backdated. But the Jenkins Estate Board has an automatic trigger that freezes all liquid assets the moment a principal dies. If he dies during standard business hours, the board gets notified immediately, and I am locked out. If you call it at exactly 11 o'clock tonight, the American banks are closed, but the Asian markets are open." The power of attorney gives me a 4-hour window to legally bypass the board and drain $5 million from his personal offshore holding account before the probate freeze hits the system tomorrow morning. I listened to the pure, unadulterated evil spilling from his mouth. He had orchestrated every single second of this fraud. He had bought a dirty doctor. He had forged my father's signature. He was actively planning to plunder the family wealth while my father's body was still warm. "Do not worry about Sienna," Chad scoffed, answering another question from the doctor. "My wife is a beautiful, easily manipulated idiot. She is probably browsing a luxury catalog right now, looking for a designer black dress for the funeral. She signs whatever I put in front of her. She thinks this is about securing our future. She has no idea I am selling Cascade Heights to the Vanguard Group the minute the ink is dry on the death certificate." He paused, his voice dropping into a register of pure racist disdain. That old man held on to those rundown historic properties like they were sacred ground. It is just dirt. Overpriced dirt, sitting in a gentrifying neighborhood. Vanguard is going to pay me cash for that dirt, and they are going to bulldoze the entire block to build luxury condos. By the time Sienna realizes she signed away her own heritage, I will have the capital to save my father's hedge fund from federal indictment, and I will be untouchable. The sheer audacity of his plan was staggering. He was not just stealing money, he was actively attempting to erase our family's cultural legacy, wiping out the very properties my grandfather had fought tooth and nail to maintain during the Jim Crow era. He viewed our history as nothing more than a convenient ATM to bail out his incompetent broke white family. "Just get it done," Chad commanded, his voice trembling with a terrifying mix of desperation and greed. "Pump him full of whatever you need to keep him quiet. At 11 o'clock, you call it. I will handle Sienna. I will handle the tears. Just give me the death certificate." Chad ended the call, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He leaned heavily against the consultation room table, taking deep, ragged breaths as he tried to compose himself. He smoothed down his cashmere sweater, running his hands over his face, carefully reconstructing the mask of the supportive, grieving son-in-law. He practiced a somber, tragic expression in the reflection of the window. I quietly tapped the stop button on my voice recorder, securing the digital file that would eventually send him to federal prison for a very long time. The audio was pristine. He had just confessed to wire fraud, forgery, medical tampering, and conspiracy, all in one convenient, highly illegal monologue. I backed away from the door, moving with the silent, deliberate grace of a predator who had just successfully cornered its prey. He thought he had outsmarted a billionaire and a Spelman graduate. He thought his Ivy League degree and his white privilege gave him the divine right to march into Atlanta and steal a legacy he could never earn. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he never bothered to look closely at the Vanguard Group. He never bothered to check who actually owned the shell company he was so desperate to sell our properties to. I slipped back into the main corridor, my mind racing with absolute clarity. It was time to go back to my father's hospital room. It was time to tell him that his son-in-law had just ordered his execution. And it was time to finalize the trap that would ensure Chad Sterling lost absolutely everything. The camera cuts back and forth in rapid, rhythmic succession. A tight shot on my face, sharp and resolute. A quick cut to my father sitting up against the stiff hospital pillows, the oxygen tube pushed aside. A flash to the heart monitor, its steady green line, proving his vital signs are perfectly stable. The visual tempo is fast, erratic, mirroring the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I step back into the VIP cardiology suite and lock the heavy wooden door behind me. I did not waste a single second. I walked straight to the side of his bed, pulled out my phone, and hit play. My father listened in absolute silence. The high-definition audio of Chad's frantic pacing filled the sterile room. He heard his son-in-law order a medically induced coma. He heard the exact timeline of the wire fraud. He heard the casual racist dismissal of Cascade Heights. But the physical blow, the one that made my father's broad shoulders physically drop, came when Chad mentioned Sienna. He heard that his eldest daughter, the golden child he had spoiled with penthouses and endless credit limits, was blindly signing away her heritage to fund a lifestyle she did not earn. The camera pushes in tight on my father's face. The heartbreak of a parent realizing their child is a traitor is a devastating thing to witness. For a fleeting moment, Marcus Jenkins looked like a fragile, tired old man. His dark eyes pooled with a profound, heavy sorrow. He stared down at his hands, the same hands that had mixed concrete and laid bricks 50 years ago to build the very empire his daughter was now letting a white gold digger dismantle. But Marcus Jenkins did not become a billionaire by wallowing in self-pity. The grief evaporated, instantly replaced by a cold, calculated, terrifying anger. The sorrow in his eyes hardened into pure, unbreakable obsidian. The tired old man vanished, and the ruthless real estate mogul returned sharper and more dangerous than ever. "I wants me dead by 11 o'clock," my father said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with absolute lethal intent. He wants to pave over my father's sweat and blood so he can save his own bankrupt criminal family. I leaned against the metal bed rail, maintaining intense eye contact. "And he is using Sienna as the rubber stamp to do it," I added. "Chad is the architect, but she is the one handing him the sledgehammer. We can call the police right now. We have the audio. We can end this before it even starts." My father slowly shook his head, a dark, predatory smile creeping across his face. "No," he commanded quietly. "If we arrest him now, it is just attempted fraud. His high-priced lawyers will drag it out for years. Sienna will claim she was manipulated. She will play the victim, and she will never learn her lesson. If we want to cut out a cancer, Maya, we have to let it fully expose itself first. We give him exactly what he wants. We give him a dead billionaire." Before I could respond, the handle of the hospital door clicked. The camera cuts sharply to the doorway. Dr. Aris stepped into the room. He was holding a syringe loaded with a clear liquid, the sedative Chad had just ordered him to administer. The doctor froze, his eyes widening in pure shock as he realized his patient was not resting quietly, but was sitting upright, fully alert, and staring at him with the intensity of a loaded gun. "Shut the door, Dr. Aris," my father ordered. It was not a request. The doctor swallowed hard, his hand trembling as he pushed the door closed. "Mr. Jenkins, I was just coming to administer a mild relaxant for your blood pressure." I stepped forward, mirroring my father's icy demeanor. I tapped the screen of my phone. The crisp, undeniable audio of Dr. Aris's voice negotiating a $500,000 bribe to fake a time of death played loudly in the quiet room. The syringe slipped from the doctor's fingers, clattering against the linoleum floor. All the color instantly drained from his face. He backed up against the wall, trapped. "You have two choices, doctor," I said, crossing my arms and stepping into his line of sight. "Choice A involves me sending this audio file directly to the FBI, the Georgia Medical Board, and the Atlanta Police Department. You will lose your medical license by morning. You will be indicted for medical tampering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and attempted manslaughter. You will spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary, and Chad Sterling will absolutely not pay your legal fees." Dr. Aris began to hyperventilate. "Please," he stammered, his eyes darting between me and my father. "He threatened me. He said he would ruin my practice." "Choice B," my father interrupted, taking over the interrogation with effortless authority. "Choice B is that you walk out of this room and you do exactly what Chad pays you to do. You will go to his eager, greedy little face and tell him that my heart gave out. You will sign an official death certificate stamping my time of death at exactly 11 o'clock tonight. You will secure a private gurney, and you will personally wheel me down to the underground service elevator, where my private security team will be waiting to transport me to my daughter's apartment. I'll become our double agent," I clarified, leaving no room for negotiation. "You feed Chad whatever lies keep him comfortable. You make him believe his master plan is working perfectly. And when the trap snaps shut, we might just forget to send this recording to the authorities." The doctor was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he weighed his options. It was not a difficult choice. Self-preservation always wins. He nodded frantically, his voice shaking. "Yes, yes, I will do it. Whatever you need, I will falsify the charts. I will make sure the nurses are cleared from this wing at 10:45. "Excellent," my father said, leaning back into his pillows with a look of supreme satisfaction. "Then it is settled. Tonight Marcus Jenkins dies." The fast-paced cuts slow down, settling on a steady, intense two-shot of my father and me. We had just crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back. We were actively conspiring to fake a death, not to flee, but to stand our ground. We were setting the ultimate stage to test the loyalty of a daughter and the arrogance of a thief. Chad thought the international banking window was his greatest asset. He thought the time difference between Atlanta and the Cayman Islands gave him the perfect cover to drain $5 million and sell our ancestral land. He had no idea that I already owned the company he was trying to sell the land to. He had no idea that every single move he was about to make over the next 12 hours would be strictly monitored, recorded, and weaponized against him. I looked at my father and we shared a silent nod. The grief of Sienna's betrayal was still there, a phantom ache in his chest, but the fire of retribution burned much brighter. The clock on the hospital wall ticked closer to 11. The bait was officially set. Now all we had to do was wait in the dark and watch the rats come out to feast. The camera tracks me from behind, moving in a smooth, continuous glide as I march down the executive corridor of the Jenkins Estate corporate headquarters. The rhythmic, sharp clicking of my stilettos against the polished marble floor serves as the only soundtrack. The walls around me are lined with framed photographs of my grandfather and my father, visual testaments to a generational Black empire built from the ground up in Atlanta. I reach the massive, custom-carved oak doors of the primary boardroom. I do not knock. I do not pause. I place both hands flat against the heavy wood and push them open with enough force to make the brass hinges groan in protest. The heavy doors swing wide, and the visual hitting the camera lens is an absolute masterclass in unearned audacity. Flash forward, exactly 12 hours from the hospital room. The emergency shareholder meeting is already in session. Sitting directly at the head of the massive mahogany conference table, occupying the custom leather chair that has belonged exclusively to Marcus Jenkins for 30 years, is Chad Sterling. He is wearing a crisp, dark morning suit, projecting an aura of solemn corporate authority. Sitting immediately to his right is Sienna. She is draped in an extravagant runway, ready black couture dress, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. The rest of the table is lined with the senior board members, all wearing expressions of profound shock, confusion, and grief. I step fully into the room, letting the heavy oak doors click shut behind me. The sudden noise draws every eye in the room. Chad stops mid-sentence. His arrogant posture stiffens for a fraction of a second before he forces a patronizing, sympathetic smile onto his face. Maya, Chad says, his voice dripping with a sickly, sweet, rehearsed compassion that makes my stomach turn. We were not sure you were going to make it. I know how emotionally fragile you can be during times of crisis. Please find an empty seat near the back. We are in the middle of navigating a highly sensitive transition for the family. I do not move toward the back of the room. I walk directly toward the head of the table, my eyes locked dead onto his. I am not emotionally fragile, Chad, I reply, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the silent boardroom. And I find it incredibly interesting that you are currently keeping my father's chair warm. I assume you are just dusting it off, considering your complete lack of executive qualifications to sit in it. Several board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sienna drops the silk handkerchief and glares at me, the grieving daughter routine instantly vanishing to reveal the viciousness underneath. Show some respect, Maya, Sienna snaps, her voice echoing sharply. Dad just passed away last night. We are all devastated. But the market does not care about our grief. Chad is stepping up to provide the steady leadership this company desperately needs to survive the opening bell. You should be thanking him for taking on this massive burden while you process your feelings. I stop just a few feet away from Chad, looking down at him. I am looking at a man who thinks he has just successfully stolen a billion-dollar legacy. Thanking him, I ask, letting a cold, mocking laugh escape my lips. Thanking a man who has not successfully managed a lemonade stand, let alone a commercial real estate portfolio. My father built this company to uplift Cascade Heights and empower our community. He did not build it to serve as a bailout fund for a broke, over-leveraged country club reject who married into the family specifically to pay off his own father's margin calls. Chad slams his hands down flat on the mahogany table, the loud smack making the nearest board members flinch. He stands up, trying to use his height to establish dominance, but I refuse to yield a single inch of ground. This company is facing a catastrophic leadership vacuum. Chad growls, dropping the supportive brother-in-law act entirely. Marcus Jenkins is dead. That is a tragic fact. But the Jenkins estate cannot afford to bleed stock value because the board is paralyzed by sentimentality. This family needs a protector. It needs someone who understands high-level aggressive corporate restructuring. He reaches inside his tailored suit jacket and pulls out a thick, legally bound folder. He throws it onto the center of the table with a loud, dramatic thud. What you clearly fail to understand, Maya Chad continues, his voice rising with triumphant arrogance, is that Marcus knew exactly how vulnerable this company would be without him. He knew you lacked the business acumen to handle a crisis of this magnitude. That is why he updated his directives. Right here, notarized and filed with the state of Georgia, is a full, irrevocable power of attorney. It transfers absolute administrative control and all voting shares directly to Sienna. And as her husband and appointed financial proxy, I am officially stepping in as the interim chief executive officer of the Jenkins estate. A collective gasp ripples through the boardroom. The senior members, men and women who have dedicated decades of their lives to working alongside my father, stare at the documents in pure disbelief. They are looking at a hostile takeover happening in broad daylight, executed by a man who has zero respect for the culture, the history, or the people who built the very walls surrounding him. Sienna sits up straighter, looking around the room with a smug, victorious expression. She genuinely believes she has just won the ultimate prize. She believes she has finally crushed her younger sister and secured her position as the undisputed queen of the Jenkins empire. The directives are legally binding, Sienna announces to the shocked board members. My husband speaks for me, and he speaks for the estate. Anyone who has a problem with his leadership can submit their resignation to Human Resources immediately. Maya, you are officially dismissed from this meeting. You have no voting power, no shares, and absolutely no voice in this room anymore. Security will escort you to your office so you can pack your personal items. Chad crosses his arms over his chest, looking down at me with a sickeningly triumphant grin. He thinks he has completely boxed me out. He thinks throwing a stack of forged papers on a mahogany table has magically turned him into a billionaire CEO. You heard your sister, Chad says, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. The adults are handling the business now. Run along, little girl. Your services are no longer required. I stand my ground, completely unbothered by the forged documents sitting on the table. I do not look at the security guards stepping nervously into the room. I do not look at the panicking board members. I keep my eyes locked entirely on Chad Sterling. The sheer blinding audacity of his power grab is exactly what my father and I anticipated. He has taken the bait, and he has dragged Sienna right into the trap with him. I am not going anywhere, Chad. I reply, my voice perfectly level and laced with lethal confidence, because before you start redecorating my father's office and firing his loyal board members, we need to have a very serious conversation about the specific real estate transaction you are trying to force through this morning. Let us talk about Cascade Heights. Let us talk about the Vanguard Group. Let us talk about exactly what you think you are selling. The camera whips back and forth, capturing the frantic energy of the room. It pans sharply from Chad's smug, entitled smirk to Sienna's defensive glare, and finally lands on my face, completely unbothered. The tension in the Jenkins estate boardroom is palpable. The heavy oak doors are shut tight, sealing us in this high-stakes battleground. The senior board members are frozen, watching a hostile takeover unfold right before their eyes. Chad reaches into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket. He pulls out a thick, legal-looking folder and tosses it onto the center of the massive mahogany table. It lands with a heavy, dramatic thud, sliding just far enough to stop directly in front of the oldest board member, Mr. Harrison. That Chad announces, his voice echoing loudly across the silent room, is the updated, legally binding directive of Marcus Jenkins. It is a full, irrevocable power of attorney. It transfers absolute administrative control and all voting shares directly to Sienna. And as her legally appointed proxy, I am stepping in as interim chief executive officer of the Jenkins estate. Mr. Harrison carefully opens the folder, his hands trembling slightly. He scans the document, his eyes widening in disbelief behind his wire-rimmed glasses. The other board members lean in trying to catch a glimpse of the paperwork that supposedly invalidates everything my father built. I do not look at the document. I do not need to. I know exactly what it says. I know exactly who forged the signature and exactly how much they paid the corrupt notary to backdate the stamp. I keep my eyes locked entirely on Chad. Before we get bogged down in the tragic emotional details of Marcus's passing, Chad continues clasping his hands together and leaning forward with practiced corporate authority. We need to address the immediate future of this company. The market requires stability. It requires decisive visionary leadership. And frankly, it requires us to shed the dead weight that has been holding the Jenkins estate back. He turns his gaze directly toward me. The progressive, culturally aware mask he usually wears for the public is completely gone, replaced by the arrogant, predatory opportunist he truly is. First order of business, Chad says, his tone shifting from authoritative to commanding. Maya, I need your security clearances. Hand over your master access card, your biometric passcodes, and the digital encryption keys for the shadow accounts. You are officially dismissed from this meeting and from this company. Sienna nods in agreement, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. It is for the best, Maya. You have always been too emotional to handle the business side of things. Dad knew that. That is why he trusted me and Chad to protect his legacy. I let a cold, mocking laugh escape my lips. Protect his legacy. Is that what we are calling it now? Protect his legacy by evicting his youngest daughter and liquidating his life's work before his body is even cold. Chad slams his hand down on the table, silencing the room. The Jenkins estate cannot afford to be paralyzed by sentimentality. We are making aggressive moves to secure the financial health of this portfolio. Which brings me to the second order of business. He gestures broadly toward the large interactive screen at the end of the boardroom. A massive architectural rendering appears, showing sleek modern high-rises towering over a perfectly manicured plaza. Effective immediately, Chad announces, puffing out his chest. The Jenkins estate is finalizing the sale of the entire Cascade Heights commercial district to the Vanguard Group. The deal is structured as an outright liquidation. Vanguard will acquire the land, bulldoze those outdated, dilapidated storefronts, and break ground on a massive state-of-the-art, luxury condominium complex. A collective gasp ripples through the board members. Mr. Harrison stands up, his voice shaking with indignation. You cannot be serious. Cascade Heights is the crown jewel of this company. It is a historic black commercial district. Your father poured millions into preserving those buildings. He fought off developers for decades to protect those businesses. I was a sentimental old fool, Chad snaps back, his voice dripping with venom and disrespect. He was holding on to a romanticized version of a neighborhood that is dead. It is prime real estate sitting in the middle of a gentrifying zone, and he was wasting millions subsidizing failing businesses just to protect some imaginary cultural heritage. Vanguard is offering us top dollar entirely in cash. Sienna leans forward, placing a comforting hand on Chad's arm. We have to think globally, Mr. Harrison. The proceeds from this sale will allow us to diversify the portfolio. Chad has incredible connections in Europe. We are going to expand the Jenkins brand internationally. I stare at her, my blood running cold at the sheer depth of her betrayal. She is not just selling out our father. She is selling out our community, our history, and our legacy, all to fund her failing fashion line and her husband's desperate need to pay off his family's margin calls. You are going to sell the land our grandfather bled to keep during Jim Crow, I say, my voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. You are going to hand over a historic black neighborhood to a white developer so they can build luxury condos that none of the current residents will ever be able to afford. You are gentrifying our own legacy, Sienna. It is just dirt, Maya. Chad interrupts, his true colors shining brightly for everyone to see. It is overpriced dirt, and we are cashing out. The Vanguard Group is wiring the funds directly into our offshore accounts the moment the transition is finalized. I take a slow, deliberate step toward the head of the table. I do not look at the forged documents. I do not look at the panicking board members. I keep my eyes locked on the arrogant, utterly clueless man sitting in my father's chair. He thinks he has won. He thinks his fake papers and his aggressive posture have secured the victory. He has absolutely no idea that the Vanguard Group he is so desperate to sell our legacy to is not the faceless corporate entity he believes it to be. He has no idea that the trap is already perfectly set. The camera pushes in tight on my face. Every microscopic muscle twitch, every subtle narrowing of my eyes is captured in high definition. The disgust rising in my throat is a physical living thing. I do not blink. I just stare at the woman who shares my DNA, watching her eagerly trade our family's soul for a seat at a table that will never truly respect her. Her ignorance is staggering, but her pride is absolutely venomous. Sienna shifts in her chair, misinterpreting my deliberate silence as defeat. She smooths the front of her black couture dress, her diamond rings catching the harsh overhead boardroom lights. She lifts her chin, attempting to look down her nose at me. You have to look at the bigger picture. Maya, Sienna says, her voice taking on that sickeningly sweet, patronizing tone she reserves for the press and her social media followers. Cascade Heights served its purpose in the past, but we are a global brand now. The capital from this Vanguard deal is exactly what I need to inject life into the Sienna Royale Paris expansion. We are taking the Jenkins name to Europe. High fashion, international retail. Chad negotiated the margins perfectly. We are finally transcending local real estate. This is how we elevate the family name on a global scale. I tilt my head, a cold, humorless smile touching the corners of my mouth. Elevate. I repeat the word slowly, letting it drip with absolute unfiltered contempt. You want to talk about elevation, Sienna? Let us talk about your Paris expansion. Let us talk about the fact that your last 3 runway shows were entirely funded by Dad's emergency line of credit because your flagship store in Buckhead is currently 6 months behind on rent. Sienna's jaw drops. The senior board members who were previously staring in horror at Chad now snap their undivided attention to her. Her perfect posture crumbles instantly. Shut up, Sienna hisses, her pristine facade cracking violently. You know nothing about my brand. You are just a jealous, bitter little girl trying to ruin my moment. I know your chief financial officer quietly resigned last Tuesday. I fire back the ping-pong of our dialogue, relentless and sharp. I know your European distributor dropped you because your inventory consists of overpriced, mass-produced garbage manufactured in sweatshops. Slapping the word luxury on a cheap polyester blend does not make you a mogul, Sienna. It makes you a fraud. And now you want to fund your bankrupt vanity project by selling the very ground our family bled for. Chad tries to intervene, slamming his hand on the table again to regain control of the narrative. Keep the business financials out of this. This is about real estate. This is about maximizing shareholder value and moving this company into the 21st century. I turn my lethal gaze back to him, but my words are entirely for my sister. You want to talk about real estate. Let us talk about what exactly you are handing over to this man, I say, my voice rising in volume and power echoing off the mahogany walls. Grandpa Jenkins did not just buy Cascade Heights. He fought a brutal, bloody war for it. During the Jim Crow era, when the banks redlined every single black neighborhood in this city, when they refused to give our people loans to build anything, Grandpa pooled money from the community. He bought those storefronts in cash. He stood on the porch of the main leasing office with a shotgun in his hands when the Klan threatened to burn it to the ground. He took beatings from corrupt police officers just to ensure that black business owners had a safe place to operate without fear of being lynched or harassed. He built grocery stores, independent pharmacies, and community clinics when the city refused to even look at us. I take a slow, deliberate step closer to Sienna. She shrinks back into her leather chair, the historical weight of her treason finally crashing down on her shoulders. Her eyes dart nervously around the room, realizing the board members are nodding along with my words. That land is not just a line item on a spreadsheet, I continue, my voice vibrating with generational rage. That dirt holds the blood, the sweat, and the absolute resilience of our people. Grandpa built an economic sanctuary when the entire world told us we were worth absolutely nothing. And now you are perfectly willing to hand the keys to that sacred sanctuary over to a mediocre white gold digger who uses our culture as a costume. Chad's face flushes a deep, angry red. He steps forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. Do not bring race into this. Vanguard is a legitimate development firm bringing capital to a dead zone. It is strictly business. Vanguard is a wrecking ball. I shoot back, slicing his argument to ribbons before he can even finish his sentence. And you, Chad, are exactly what you have always been. A colonizer in a custom suit. You show up to our family barbecues, you throw around black slang. You learned on the internet to seem relatable. And the second you think the patriarch is dead, you immediately attempt to bulldoze a historic black commercial district to build luxury condos for your rich white friends. You are gentrifying our history to pay off your father's catastrophic gambling debts. I look back at Sienna, my expression shifting from pure anger to unadulterated pity. It is the one emotion I know will completely destroy her narcissistic ego. You sold out your own heritage, Sienna. I tell her, my words landing like physical blows to her chest. You traded your grandfather's legacy for a man who does not love you, for a man who only sees your last name as a massive bailout fund. You are handing our history to a man who secretly despises the very culture that made you wealthy. Sienna's hands are trembling now. Her diamond rings click nervously against the mahogany table. She looks at Chad, a flicker of genuine doubt finally piercing her blind, desperate devotion. Chad senses he is losing his grip on his primary asset. He moves quickly, stepping between us, trying to physically block me from speaking directly to his wife. This meeting is completely over. Chad barks, his voice tight with escalating panic. Security, I gave you a direct order. Remove her from the premises immediately. The Vanguard deal is moving forward today. The paperwork is finalized and the wire transfers are pending approval. Two large security guards step tentatively into the boardroom. They have worked for my father for years. They look deeply conflicted, their eyes darting between me and the man holding the forged power of attorney. I do not fight them. I do not raise my voice or cause a physical scene. I simply adjust the cuffs of my tailored blazer, maintaining the absolute terrifying calm of a woman who holds all the winning cards in the deck. Do not worry, gentlemen, I say smoothly, giving the guards a reassuring nod. I am leaving. Chad has a very important contract to sign, and I would not dream of interrupting him. I look at Chad, flashing him a smile that makes the blood drain entirely from his face. It is the smile of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly into the snare. Sign the papers, Chad. I whisper, my voice dripping with lethal anticipation. Sign away the legacy. Sign away the properties. Sell it all to the Vanguard Group. I completely insist. Chad's face contorts into a mask of pure, unadulterated triumph. He actually believes my sudden compliance is a surrender. He thinks my insistence that he sign the papers is the bitter, desperate sarcasm of a defeated woman who has finally realized she is hopelessly outmatched. He scoffs, a sharp, ugly sound that reverberates through the tense atmosphere of the boardroom. He looks at the two security guards standing hesitantly near the door. Remove her. Chad barks, his voice cracking slightly with the adrenaline of his impending victory. Escort her out of the building. Revoke her parking privileges and deactivate her keycard. If she tries to access the executive floors again, call the Atlanta police and have her arrested for criminal trespassing. The guardsmen, who have known me since I was a teenager, bringing coffee to my father during summer internships, look physically pained. One of them, a broad-shouldered man, named Marcus, takes a reluctant step forward, his eyes full of silent apology. I do not force him to do his job. I hold up a single manicured hand, stopping him in his tracks. I can find the exit, I say, my voice smooth and entirely devoid of panic. I brush an invisible speck of dust from the lapel of my tailored blazer, keeping my posture impeccably straight. I turn my back on the senior board members, who are watching me with expressions of profound pity and horror. They genuinely believe they are witnessing the absolute destruction of the Jenkins family legacy. They think the war is officially over and the wrong side has won. I walk slowly toward the heavy oak doors, my heels sinking into the plush carpet. Before I step across the threshold, I pause and slowly turn back around to face the massive mahogany table. If this were playing out on a screen, the camera would drop immediately to a low angle, positioned just above the table's surface, shooting upward to capture Chad. He looks like a conqueror claiming his newly acquired territory. He reaches into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulls out a sleek, heavy Mont Blanc pen. The gold trim catches the harsh boardroom lighting as he clicks the cap off. He eagerly slides the transfer deed for Cascade Heights toward himself, completely disregarding the generational blood, sweat, and tears poured into that specific soil. Beside him, Sienna lets out a long, shaky breath of relief. She reaches out and places her hand over his free one, her diamond rings flashing under the lights. Her guilt over my speech about our grandfather has already vanished, instantly replaced by the intoxicating fantasy of her Paris fashion expansion and the massive influx of European capital. She has made her final choice. She chose the colonizer over her own blood. Chad presses the nib of the pen to the thick legal parchment. "I want you to watch this, Maya," he sneers, not bothering to look up from the document. "I want you to remember this exact moment for the rest of your life." This is the moment the adults finally took the wheel. The sound of the pen scratching violently against the paper fills the dead silence of the room. It is a loud, abrasive, grating noise. He signs his name with aggressive, sweeping strokes on the first page. Then he flips aggressively to the next. He signs the transfer of deed. He signs the authorization to release the commercial properties to the Vanguard Group. He signs the execution of the forged power of attorney, legally binding himself and Sienna to the entire transaction. Each stroke of the pen is another nail in his own coffin, though he is entirely too blind and too arrogant to see it. "Mr. Harrison." The oldest board member closes his eyes and bows his head, unable to watch the physical surrender of the company's most historic and culturally significant asset. The other executives shift uncomfortably in their leather chairs, already calculating how quickly they can update their resumes and escape the sinking ship that Chad Sterling is currently commandeering. Chad finishes the final signature with a harsh, triumphant flourish. He caps the pen with a loud snap and pushes the stack of executed documents toward the center of the table. "It is done," he announces, his chest heaving with sheer exhilaration. The Vanguard Group now owns Cascade Heights. The wire transfers will clear the international banking windows by tomorrow morning. The Jenkins estate is officially stepping into the future. He looks up at me, clearly expecting to see tears. He expects to see a broken, devastated woman weeping over the devastating loss of her family's heritage. He expects to see the shattered scapegoat he has spent years mocking at Thanksgiving dinners and country club retreats. Instead, the camera begins a slow, deliberate zoom directly onto my face. I am not crying. I am not shaking. I am smiling. It is not a small, polite smile. It is a wide, chilling, completely unbothered smile that reaches all the way to my dark eyes. It is the kind of smile that makes apex predators pause in the tall grass. It is the smile of a woman who just watched her greatest enemy enthusiastically lock himself inside a burning building and hand her the only key. Chad's triumphant grin falters for a fraction of a second. A tiny microscopic flicker of doubt crosses his pale features as his brain tries to process my absolute lack of devastation. He cannot fathom why I am looking at him with such profound, terrifying satisfaction. He just took everything from me. He just sold my grandfather's legacy to a faceless white corporation. I should be screaming. I should be begging the board members to intervene and stop the sale. But I just stand there, perfectly composed, letting my eerie silence suffocate his victory. "Have a wonderful afternoon, Chad." I say, my voice light and almost melodic. The acoustics of the large room carry my words perfectly to every terrified executive at the table. "Make sure you keep a copy of those documents for your personal records. I have a feeling you are going to want to review them very closely tomorrow morning." I do not wait for his response. I turn on my heel, step out of the boardroom, and let the heavy oak doors swing shut behind me with a loud final thud. The closing doors cut off the sight of Chad's confused, increasingly paranoid face. I walk alone down the long, quiet executive corridor, my smile never once fading. The board members are terrified. Sienna is dreaming of Paris. Chad is celebrating his imaginary billions. And the audience is left staring at the closed doors, burning with one singular, desperate question. Why on earth did I just let him win? Why did I stand by and watch him sign away the most valuable piece of real estate in the Jenkins portfolio without throwing a single punch or making a single phone call to stop him? The answer is remarkably simple. You never interrupt your enemy when he is in the middle of making a fatal, irreversible mistake. Chad thinks he just sold Cascade Heights to a predatory developer. He thinks he just secured the capital to save his bankrupt family from federal indictment. But what he actually did was infinitely more destructive to his own life. And in exactly 12 hours, when he marches into his lawyer's office to finalize the offshore wire transfer, the reality of what he just signed is going to hit him with the force of a speeding freight train. The camera cuts abruptly to the blinding, sterile white lighting of a high-end corporate law firm in Buckhead. The transition from the warm, historic tones of the Jenkins Estate boardroom to this clinical, soulless glass box is deliberately jarring. It is precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, exactly 30 minutes after the phone call that woke me up. The sprawling Atlanta skyline stretches out behind massive floor-to-ceiling windows. But the people inside this room are not looking at the view. They are entirely focused on a computer screen displaying a loading bar. Chad is practically vibrating with nervous, ecstatic energy. He is leaning over the polished glass desk of his highly paid, morally bankrupt defense attorney, a man named Preston, who charges $1,000 an hour to make financial crimes disappear into international loopholes. Sienna is sitting on a white leather sofa in the corner. She is not crying over the father who supposedly passed away just 10 hours ago. Instead, she is scrolling through a digital catalog on her tablet, actively selecting a custom black veil to wear for the cameras at the upcoming funeral. The routing numbers are verified. Preston says, his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard. The offshore holding accounts in the Cayman Islands are open and ready to receive the deposit. We just need the final authorization code to bypass the domestic hold. Chad runs a hand through his perfectly styled hair, letting out a breath that sounds like a victory lap. He looks at his reflection in the glass partition, adjusting his expensive tie with practiced arrogance. "Do it," Chad commands, his voice echoing loudly in the pristine office. "Authorize the transfer. Drain the $5 million right now before the probate lawyers wake up and flag the estate accounts." Preston hits a key. A vibrant green checkmark flashes across the massive monitor. The digital gears of the international banking system begin to turn, officially siphoning the stolen capital out of my father's personal reserves. Chad throws his head back and lets out a sharp, triumphant laugh. He turns to Sienna, clapping his hands together loudly. "We did it," he announces, stepping away from the desk to pace the length of the office. "We actually did it. By the time the Jenkins board convenes for the emergency memorial protocol this afternoon, the liquidity will be completely untraceable. My father's margin calls will be covered by noon, and the Vanguard Group deal will officially clear the escrow window by tomorrow." Sienna does not even look up from her tablet. She casually swipes to the next page of designer morning wear. "I still cannot believe how easy it was," she remarks, her tone dripping with bored satisfaction. "Dad always acted like protecting the company required some kind of exhausting divine sacrifice. He made it seem like carrying the Jenkins legacy was the heaviest burden in the world. It turns out all it takes is one smart transition strategy and a few well-placed signatures." Chad walks over to the minibar and pours himself a glass of sparkling water, raising it in a mock toast. "Here is to the new era of the Jenkins estate," he declares. "No more subsidized community centers. No more holding on to decaying brick buildings just because some ancestors marched down the street 50 years ago. We are stripping the emotion out of this portfolio and replacing it with pure, unadulterated European capital." He takes a long sip, his chest puffing out with absolute pride. "And the best part," Chad continues, a wicked, cruel smile stretching across his face, "is that I finally put your obnoxious little sister in her place. I called her at 7:30 this morning. I told her the old man was dead and ordered her to pack up her company-funded apartment." You should have heard the silence on the line, Sienna. She was completely paralyzed. For the first time in her miserable, self-righteous life, Maya had absolutely nothing to say. Sienna laughs, a high melodic sound that bounces harshly off the glass walls. "I almost wish I could be there to watch her carry her boxes out to the street," she admits, tapping her manicured nail against the screen. "She has spent her entire life judging me, acting like she is morally superior because she went to Spelman and plays with community funds. She always thought Dad would eventually realize she was the smarter daughter. Now she is completely broke, homeless, and entirely irrelevant. It is poetic justice." Preston clears his throat, interrupting their sick celebration. The lawyer adjusts his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes locked on the dual monitors in front of him. The wire transfer is processing through the clearinghouse. Preston confirms, his voice strictly professional. The funds will be fully settled in the Cayman accounts within the next 20 minutes. However, we do need to finalize the defensive strategy regarding the medical records. If Maya decides to demand an independent autopsy or challenges the timeline of the cardiac arrest, we need to ensure Dr. Eris is completely insulated from any federal inquiry. Chad waves his hand dismissively, entirely unbothered by the logistical reality of the crime he just committed. Dr. Eris is handled. He knows exactly what happens to his lucrative private practice if he steps out of line. The death certificate is already signed and stamped. Marcus Jenkins died of natural causes related to a documented history of cardiovascular disease. It is a closed loop. Maya has no money, no corporate access, and no legal standing to challenge a medical consensus. She is entirely neutralized. Sienna sets her tablet down on the glass coffee table, finally giving her husband her undivided attention. The Parisian expansion is going to need an immediate injection of $2 million by Friday, she states, seamlessly transitioning from discussing her father's fake death to her own vanity project. The European distributors are holding my inventory until the accounts clear. You promised the Vanguard capital would be liquid by the end of the week. It will be. Chad assures her, walking over and placing a reassuring kiss on her forehead. The Vanguard Group bought Cascade Heights outright. The transfer deed is ironclad. The moment the registry updates, we will route the capital directly into the Sienna Royale operating accounts. You will be taking over Paris by the end of the month, exactly as I promised. The sheer magnitude of their delusion is staggering. They are standing in a bright, sterile office in Buckhead, gleefully divvying up an empire they did not build, using money they did not earn, all while celebrating the death of a man who loved them. They believe they have successfully executed the perfect corporate crime. They believe they have outsmarted the system, outmaneuvered the board, and permanently destroyed the annoying younger sister who always saw right through their facade. Chad walks back over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling Atlanta traffic far below. He slips one hand into his tailored pocket, projecting the image of a titan of industry, observing his newly conquered kingdom. He thinks he is untouchable. He thinks the millions currently funneling into offshore accounts will permanently cement his status among the global elite. He has absolutely no inkling that the Vanguard Group is a ghost. He has no idea that the real estate transaction he signed yesterday legally transferred every single asset he and Sienna possess directly into my private holding company for a single dollar. And most importantly, as he stands there admiring his own reflection in the glass, he does not know that the elevator out in the hallway just dinged. He does not know that the heavy glass doors of the law firm are about to be violently pushed open. He is celebrating the flawless execution of a murder that never actually happened, completely unaware that the dead man is currently walking down the corridor to collect his debt. The heavy frosted glass doors of the law firm do not just open. They explode inward with a concussive force that rattles the framed diplomas on the pristine walls. If a camera were capturing this exact fraction of a second, the frame rate would drop into a dramatic, agonizing slow motion. Every single detail is magnified. The brass door handles slamming against the plaster, the sudden violent rush of air disrupting the sterile quiet of the office. And stepping through the threshold, parting the dust like a vengeful god returning to reclaim his earth, is Marcus Jenkins. He is not wearing a hospital gown. He is not strapped to a gurney in a subterranean service elevator. He is wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp burgundy tie, and an expression of pure, unadulterated wrath that could freeze boiling water. He looks like a titan, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his dark eyes locking instantly onto the parasitic son-in-law standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. The physical reaction inside the office is instantaneous and catastrophic. Chad Sterling freezes. The arrogant, triumphant smirk is physically ripped from his face. The crystal glass of sparkling water he had just raised in a mock toast slips directly through his suddenly paralyzed fingers. The camera follows the glass in slow motion as it falls through the air, hitting the polished hardwood floor and shattering into 1,000 jagged, glittering pieces. The sharp, explosive crash of the breaking crystal shatters the spell of silence, but Chad does not even flinch. All the blood drains from his face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. His jaw unhinges, his mouth opening and closing, as his brain completely misfires, desperately trying to process the absolute impossibility of the dead billionaire currently glaring a hole straight through his chest. He looks like a man who has just watched the ground beneath his feet turn to vapor. Over on the white leather sofa, Sienna registers the violent intrusion a split second later. She looks up from her digital catalog of designer morning wear. When her eyes land on the towering figure of her father, her brain does not process survival. It processes the supernatural. She lets out a blood-curdling, visceral scream of pure, unfiltered terror. It is a high, piercing shriek that tears through her throat, the raw sound of a traitor staring directly at the ghost of the man she just betrayed. She scrambles backward on the sofa, kicking her designer heels against the cushions in a frantic, animalistic attempt to get away. The tablet slips from her lap, clattering onto the glass coffee table, the screen still displaying the custom black veil she planned to wear while burying him. She presses her hands over her mouth, her eyes bulging with a horrifying mixture of shock, guilt, and absolute panic. Preston, the $1,000 an hour defense attorney, is the only one who instantly understands the legal reality of the situation. He does not see a ghost. He sees a federal indictment walking through his door. Panic seizes his features. He violently shoves his rolling chair backward, lunging for the power cord of his dual monitor setup. He frantically tries to slam his laptop shut, desperate to hide the glaring green confirmation screen of the $5 million wire transfer to the Cayman Islands. But his hands are shaking too badly. He knocks over a stack of legal briefs, scattering papers across his pristine desk, his professional composure entirely destroyed by the realization that he has just committed wire fraud against a man who is very much alive and extremely capable of ruining his entire career. I step out from behind my father, moving smoothly into the room. I am wearing a sharp ivory blazer, providing a stark visual contrast to the funeral attire Chad and Sienna had so eagerly put on. I do not look surprised. I look fiercely, radiantly victorious. I stop just a few feet inside the room, crossing my arms and watching the absolute devastation unfold with deep, profound satisfaction. My father does not yell. He steps fully into the office, his heavy leather shoes crunching deliberately over the shattered glass on the floor. He walks straight toward the center of the room, claiming the space with a gravitational pull that sucks all the oxygen out of the air. He looks at Preston, who is still desperately fumbling with his computer cables. "Step away from the keyboard, Preston," my father commands. His voice is a low, rumbling baritone that vibrates the glass partitions. It is the voice of a patriarch who has built neighborhoods from the dirt, up a voice that has commanded boardrooms for 4 decades. "If you touch that computer again, I will personally ensure the Georgia Bar Association permanently revokes your license before the lunch hour is over." Preston throws his hands up in the air, surrendering immediately. He backs away from the desk, pressing his spine against the wall, his chest heaving as he realizes he has backed the wrong horse. My father slowly turns his attention to the white leather sofa. Sienna is hyperventilating, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps. Tears of genuine terror are currently ruining her immaculate makeup, leaving dark, messy streaks of mascara running down her pale cheeks. She reaches a trembling hand out toward him, her voice cracking under the weight of her massive guilt. "Dad," Sienna chokes out her voice, a pathetic, broken whisper. "Dad, you are the hospital said you were. They told us your heart gave out. I swear they told us you were gone." My father stares down at his eldest daughter. The heartbreak I witnessed in his hospital room has been completely cauterized, replaced by a stoic, unforgiving judgment. He looks at the tablet resting on the coffee table, the designer funeral dresses glaring brightly on the screen. He looks back at her tear-stained face, completely unmoved by her performance. "Do not insult my intelligence." "Sienna," my father says, his words landing like physical strikes. "You were not planning a funeral. You were planning a shopping spree. You sat in a sterile hospital hallway and eagerly waited for a corrupt doctor to call my time of death so you could fund a failing fashion line with the blood money of your own ancestors. You thought my legacy was nothing more than an open vault." Chad finally manages to peel himself away from the floor-to-ceiling window. His survival instinct is finally kicking in, battling the sheer, overwhelming panic clouding his judgment. He straightens his posture, desperately trying to salvage the arrogant facade he wore just 5 minutes ago. He takes a tentative step forward, his expensive shoes avoiding the broken glass. Marcus Chad stammers, his voice lacking its usual smooth, predatory confidence. "Sir, you need to understand the context here. The board was in a complete panic. We received official medical confirmation of your passing. We had a fiduciary duty to secure the estate's liquid assets against the probate freeze. Everything we did this morning was a protective measure to ensure the Jenkins portfolio survived the transition." I let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cuts through his pathetic excuses. "You did not secure anything, Chad. You initiated a $5 million wire transfer to a series of untraceable shell accounts in the Cayman Islands while simultaneously selling Cascade Heights to a developer for cash. You were running out the back door with the silver before the family even knew the house was on fire." Chad's eyes dart toward me, a flash of pure venomous hatred cutting through his fear. He realizes in this exact moment that his entire plan has been fundamentally compromised. He realizes the emergency shareholder meeting, my lack of resistance in the boardroom, and his supposed victory were all carefully orchestrated components of a massive trap. But his arrogance is a terminal disease. Even backed into a corner completely exposed, he still believes his white privilege and his forged paperwork make him the smartest man in the room. He reaches inside his morning jacket, his fingers grasping the thick legal folder containing the power of attorney. He thinks he still has a trump card to play. He pulls the documents out, gripping the forged signature that he believes makes him an untouchable king, completely oblivious to the fact that pulling that file is about to seal his absolute destruction. The camera slowly dollies in on my father, pushing past Chad and locking entirely onto Sienna. She is trembling on the white leather sofa, shrinking under the gravity of his stare. For 33 years, she has been the absolute center of his universe. He funded her private schools, her lavish European vacations, and her endless failing business ventures because he believed that protecting his daughter meant giving her the world. Now, looking at the woman who was fully prepared to bury him to buy a dress, that illusion is completely shattered. "I gave you everything." Sienna, my father begins, his voice dropping into a register of quiet, devastating heartbreak that echoes louder than a scream. "I built an empire so you would never have to know the struggles I faced. I handed you a crown you never had to forge yourself. And what did you do with it? You pawned it to the first mediocre man who fed your vanity. You watched me lying in a hospital bed, my heart failing, and your only concern was whether my death would inconvenience your social calendar." Sienna chokes on a sob, burying her face in her hands. "Dad, please," she cries, her voice muffled and pathetic. "He manipulated me. Chad told me it was the only way to save the business. He said the board was going to freeze my accounts. Do not blame the snake for biting you, when you are the one who opened the door and invited it inside." My father snaps back, instantly silencing her victim routine. "You are a grown woman. You sat in that boardroom yesterday and eagerly agreed to sell Cascade Heights. You agreed to bulldoze the exact neighborhood where your grandfather bled to build our family name. You did not do that because you were manipulated. You did it because you are empty. You have no core, Sienna. You have no loyalty to anyone but yourself. You are perfectly willing to watch our history burn to the ground as long as you get to warm your hands by the fire." Sienna shrinks into the cushions, completely destroyed. The golden child facade is entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a desperate, greedy shell. My father turns his back on her, the physical gesture severing their emotional bond with brutal finality. That is when Chad finally finds his voice. The sheer terror of getting caught red-handed is suddenly hijacked by the blinding, toxic arrogance of his own ego. He steps forward, gripping the thick legal folder tightly in his right hand. He raises his chin, straightening his posture as he squares his shoulders against the billionaire he tried to rob. "It does not matter," Chad announces, his voice ringing out sharp and loud in the sterile office. The initial panic is gone, replaced by a desperate, aggressive defiance. He slaps the folder against his open palm. "It does not matter if you are alive, Marcus. It does not matter if you walked in here and caught us. You are too late. The game is already over." My father slowly turns his head, fixing Chad with a glare of pure, unadulterated warning. You have exactly 10 seconds to put those forged papers down and walk out of this building before I have you thrown out of a window. Chad lets out a harsh, arrogant laugh. He actually takes a step closer to my father, completely intoxicated by his own delusional sense of victory. I am not going anywhere. Chad spits back, his face twisting into an ugly, triumphant sneer. You think you are so smart staging this little resurrection? You think you caught me in a trap. But you fundamentally underestimate how corporate law works in the state of Georgia. I did not just play CEO yesterday. I executed binding legal contracts. Chad pulls the specific transfer deed from the folder and shoves it aggressively into the air between them. Look at the signatures, Marcus. Look at the stamps. Sienna had full, unrestricted administrative power of attorney the moment Dr. Eris signed that death certificate last night. Under the letter of the law, she was the sole legal proxy of the Jenkins estate. And as her designated financial officer, I executed the sale of Cascade Heights to the Vanguard Group. The deed is fully signed. The transfer is legally recorded. The transaction is completely bulletproof. I watch from the sidelines, keeping my face perfectly composed. The ping-pong of their dialogue is escalating rapidly, and Chad is digging his grave deeper with every single arrogant word. You forged my medical records to trigger a fake succession. My father says, his tone deadly calm. That makes every single document in your hand completely null and void. You committed federal fraud, Chad. You are holding a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary. Prove it. Chad counters, a wicked manic gleam in his eye. Prove that Dr. Eris did not make a genuine medical error. Prove that Sienna did not act in good faith to protect the portfolio. By the time your high-priced lawyers untangle this mess in probate court, the Vanguard Group will have already bulldozed Cascade Heights. The heavy machinery is probably moving in right now. Vanguard is an international development giant. They do not care about your family drama, Marcus. They care about prime real estate. They own the land now. You cannot undo an executed sale to a good-faith third-party purchaser. Chad turns to me, his chest puffing out with absolute sickening pride. He thinks he has delivered the ultimate checkmate. He thinks his white-collar crime is so sophisticated that not even a billionaire can reverse it. I told you yesterday, Maya, Chad says, pointing a finger directly at my chest. I told you I was going to strip the emotion out of this portfolio. I sold the dirt. The wire transfer of $5 million is just the cherry on top. The real victory is that I took your precious grandfather's legacy and I sold it to a bunch of rich white developers who are going to pave over your history and turn it into a luxury shopping center. And there is absolutely nothing you or your father can do to stop them. I won. I beat you at your own game. The room falls deathly silent. Preston, the defense attorney, is still pressed against the far wall, watching the exchange with wide, terrified eyes. Sienna is softly sobbing into the leather sofa. Chad is standing in the center of the room, breathing heavily, glowing with the adrenaline of his supposed masterpiece. I do not yell. I do not show an ounce of anger. I slowly reach into the pocket of my ivory blazer. I pull out a sleek black USB drive and roll it smoothly between my fingers. I look at Chad, allowing a slow, devastating smile to spread across my face. You are absolutely right about one thing, Chad, I reply, my voice carrying the light, effortless melody of total victory. The sale is completely finalized. The ink is dry. You legally signed away Cascade Heights along with every single personal asset you and Sienna currently own to the Vanguard Group. You executed the contract perfectly. I take a slow, deliberate step toward him. Chad frowns, a tiny fraction of doubt piercing his arrogant armor. He does not understand why I am agreeing with him. He does not understand why I am smiling. But you made one incredibly stupid, catastrophic mistake. I continue, my eyes locking onto his with lethal intensity. You were so busy salivating over the cash that you never bothered to check who actually sits on the board of directors for the Vanguard Group. You never bothered to run a basic background check on the shell company you were so desperate to sell our legacy to. You just saw a buyer, and you blindly signed your life away. The camera breaks its static hold and begins a slow, sweeping 360-degree orbit around me. The sterile office background blurs into a spinning carousel of glass and steel, making me the absolute undeniable center of gravity in the room. I let out a laugh. It is not a polite, restrained chuckle. It is a full, rich, booming laugh that echoes off the pristine glass walls and shatters the suffocating tension. It is the sound of 5 grueling years of patient strategy and silent calculation finally paying off in one glorious, devastating moment. I reach into my oversized leather tote bag and pull out a thick, heavily bound stack of official incorporation documents. I do not hand them to Chad. I toss them directly onto Preston's desk. The heavy thud makes the corrupt defense attorney physically jump in his chair. Read the articles of incorporation, Preston. I command, my voice slicing through the air like a newly sharpened blade. Tell your arrogant client exactly who he just sold my grandfather's legacy to. Preston scrambles forward. His shaking hands fumble with the heavy cardstock cover. He flips through the dense legal jargon, his eyes darting frantically across the paragraphs. Chad scoffs desperately, trying to maintain his sneer, but the sweat beading on his upper lip betrays his escalating panic. Vanguard is a multinational developer based out of New York. Chad insists, his voice pitching higher, losing its smooth baritone quality. I vetted their liquidity myself. They have billions in verified assets. You are bluffing, Maya. Vanguard Group Holdings is a registered shell company based out of Delaware. I correct him, taking a slow, predatory step forward. And yes, they have billions in verified liquid assets, because I put those assets there. Chad freezes. The air completely leaves his lungs. Over on the sofa, Sienna abruptly stops sobbing. She slowly lowers her hands from her ruined face, staring at me as if I have just sprouted wings. You thought I was just some bitter, antisocial sister sitting in a rented apartment playing with community grants. I continue, my voice vibrating with absolute authority, as the camera continues its slow, triumphant orbit around me. You spent 5 entire years making jokes at Thanksgiving dinners about my little startup funds. You thought my degree from Spelman was a cute diversity badge. Let me tell you exactly what I have been doing for the last half-decade while you were busy buying designer suits on my father's credit line. I walk slowly around the edge of the glass desk, closing the distance between us. I built Apex Capital Estate, laying out the foundation of my empire. I pooled resources with my alumni network. I partnered with brilliant, ruthless Black women who understand exactly how the corporate financial system is rigged against us. We started buying up distressed commercial real estate. We acquired massive portfolios of debt, your father's toxic debt, specifically Chad. Vanguard Group is just one of 12 different shell corporations I used to quietly acquire properties from desperate, over-leveraged, arrogant men exactly like you. I am the founder, the sole managing partner, and the 100% owner of the Vanguard Group. Preston lets out a strangled gasp. He looks up from the paperwork, his face completely devoid of color. She is right, Chad, the lawyer whispers, his voice shaking with professional terror. The controlling entity of Vanguard is a private trust. The sole beneficiary and executing officer is Maya Jenkins. No, Chad breathes out, stumbling backward, until his spine hits the glass window. That is impossible. The escrow agents verified the buyer. The legal team signed off on the transfer. I verified the buyer, I shoot back, hitting him with another dose of reality. I approved the transaction. You were so blinded by your own racism, so blinded by your desperate need to erase our history and cash a quick check, that you did not even bother to read the fine print of the transfer deed you signed yesterday morning. I sold the dirt for top dollar, Chad argues, desperately clinging to the crumbling remnants of his master plan. The contract was for the commercial properties. The wire transfer is clearing right now. You signed a comprehensive asset relinquishment clause disguised as a standard liability waiver, I explained, delivering the final fatal blow. You did not just sell Cascade Heights to me. In your frantic, greedy rush to close the deal before the board could freeze the estate accounts, you signed away all of your equity in the Jenkins estate. You signed away the deed to the Buckhead penthouse Sienna currently lives in. You signed away your personal investment portfolios. You effectively transferred every single asset you and my sister legally own into my private holding company for the grand total of $1 single US. Sienna lets out a piercing shriek. She practically vaults off the white leather sofa, launching herself at her husband. What did you do? She screams, grabbing the lapels of his custom morning suit and shaking him violently. What did you sign, Chad? You told me you were protecting us. You told me I was going to Paris. You gave her my penthouse. Chad shoves her away, his eyes wide with wild, unhinged panic. It is fraud, he yells, pointing a trembling finger at me. I was under duress. I was acting as the interim CEO during a medical emergency. The courts will throw it out immediately. You cannot enforce a contract signed under deceptive pretenses. You were not under duress, Chad, I reply, my smile widening into a mask of pure, untouchable triumph. You were under the illusion of your own supremacy. You marched into a boardroom, demanded my security clearance, and proudly signed a contract of your own free will. My lawyers made sure the wording was completely bulletproof. You sold your own life away because you were entirely too arrogant to believe a black woman could draft a contract you could not comprehend. Chad looks desperately at Preston, begging his expensive lawyer for a lifeline. Tell her it is illegal, Chad pleads. Tell her she cannot enforce a predatory contract. Preston slowly closes the folder. He pushes his chair back from the desk, grabbing his expensive briefcase. He looks at Chad not as a client, but as a sinking ship. She did not force you to sign anything, Preston says, his voice devoid of any sympathy. You brought the forged power of attorney to the meeting. You initiated the sale to a third party. The fact that the third party was her shell company does not invalidate the transfer of assets. You legally bankrupted yourself, Chad. I am dropping you as a client effective immediately. The ultimate betrayal from his own legal counsel breaks the very last shred of Chad's sanity. The realization that he did not outsmart the Jenkins family, but rather played directly into the hands of the woman he so deeply underestimated, completely destroys his fragile ego. He is not a titan of industry. He is not a billionaire. He is a broke homeless criminal standing in a room with the people who just orchestrated his absolute downfall. Preston does not look back. He shoves past Chad, his shoulder clipping the panicked man as he makes a direct line for the frosted glass doors. Chad reaches out his fingers, desperately grabbing at the sleeve of Preston's expensive suit, but the lawyer violently yanks his arm away. Preston storms out of the office, the heavy doors swinging wildly in his wake. The visual stability of the room instantly shatters. The smooth, sweeping cinematic orbit abruptly stops. The perspective violently jerks into a raw, handheld documentary style. The camera frame shakes, zooming in and out erratically, perfectly mirroring the catastrophic fracturing of Chad Sterling's sanity. Chad stares at the empty doorway, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. He turns back to the desk, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He lunges for the thick stack of incorporation documents I threw on the glass surface. He frantically rips the heavy cardstock cover back, his trembling fingers tearing the corners of the pages. He scans the dense legal text, his eyes darting wildly side to side, desperately searching for a loophole, a typo, a clerical error, anything that proves this is just an elaborate nightmare. But there is no loophole. The ink is dry. The transfer is absolute. He sold his entire existence for $1. Sienna scrambles off the white leather sofa. The shock has completely worn off, replaced by a vicious, self-preserving terror. She rushes at Chad, her hands balling into fists. She starts striking him, hitting his chest and shoulders with wild, uncoordinated swings. What did you do? She screams, her voice cracking into a hysterical shriek. You gave her my penthouse. You gave her my bank accounts. You swore to me you had this under control. You promised me Paris, you incompetent liar. Chad does not try to calm her down. The supportive, culturally aware husband act evaporates into thin air. With a sudden, vicious surge of violence, he shoves Sienna hard by her shoulders. She stumbles backward, her designer heels catching on the carpet, and crashes hard into the arm of the leather sofa. She gasps, clutching her side, staring up at the man she married with pure, unadulterated horror. She is finally seeing the real Chad Sterling. He does not even look to see if she is hurt. His head snaps toward me. The veins in his neck are pulsing dangerously against his collar. The pristine, civilized mask of the Ivy League executive is entirely gone, revealing the feral, entitled predator underneath. You cannot do this to me! Chad roars, the sound tearing raw and guttural from his throat. The camera jerks sharply, framing his contorted, sweat-drenched face. You think you can just march in here and steal my property? That land belongs to me. I negotiated the terms. I secured the capital. You are just a bitter, jealous diversity hire trying to steal a white man's hard-earned equity. I stand perfectly still, my posture completely relaxed. The violent shaking of the camera lens only emphasizes my absolute terrifying calm. You do not have any equity, Chad. I reply, my voice slicing effortlessly through his screaming tantrum. You have debt. Mountains of toxic radioactive debt. And without the Vanguard cash, your father is going to default on his margin calls before the market closes today. The federal regulators are probably boxing up his hard drives in New York right at this very moment. You did not just ruin your own life. You single-handedly destroyed your entire bloodline. The reality of his father's impending federal indictment hits him like a physical blow. He grabs the heavy brass lamp sitting on Preston's desk and hurls it violently across the room. It smashes against the far wall, leaving a massive dent in the plaster before crashing to the hardwood floor. I am going to destroy you, Chad screams, his voice breaking into a manic, unhinged pitch. I am going to tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. I will drain every single cent of the Jenkins estate paying my legal fees. You think you are so brilliant. You think because you tricked me into signing a piece of paper that you actually won. I will burn this entire company to the ground before I let a miserable, socially inept black woman take what is rightfully mine. He loses his mind completely. The remaining shreds of his sanity snap with an audible, terrifying finality. He lets out a primal roar, grabbing the edge of the heavy glass coffee table and flipping it completely over. The glass shatters violently, sending jagged shards exploding across the expensive rug. Sienna screams, curling into a tight ball on the sofa to protect her face from the flying debris. Chad lowers his head, his eyes burning with pure murderous intent. He lunges at me. He closes the distance across the room in two massive, frantic strides, his hands outstretched, his fingers curling into tight, violent claws, aimed directly at my throat. He is a desperate, cornered animal willing to commit physical violence to regain control of a situation that has entirely slipped through his fingers. My father moves with terrifying speed. Marcus Jenkins does not hesitate. He steps directly into Chad's path, planting his feet firmly against the floor. But I do not retreat. I do not cower behind my father. I step forward, raising my hand and pressing it flat against my father's chest, signaling him to stop. I do not need protection. Chad crashes hard into the heavy oak desk, his momentum broken by his own clumsy, blind rage. He scrambles to find his footing, slipping on the scattered paperwork and broken glass. He grabs a heavy crystal paperweight from the desk, raising it above his head, ready to hurl it directly at my face. You are nothing, Chad shrieks, spit flying from his lips, his chest heaving with exertion. You hear me, Maya. You are absolutely nothing. I will kill you. I will wipe your entire family off the map. I look up at the heavy crystal paperweight poised in his trembling hand. I do not blink. I do not flinch. I just offer him another cold, razor-sharp smile. Throw it, Chad, I challenge him, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that freezes him dead in his tracks. Commit aggravated assault right here in front of witnesses. Add it to the staggering list of federal crimes you are about to be indicted for. Please make my day. Chad stands there shaking violently, the paperweight held high in the air. He is trapped in a prison of his own making, paralyzed by the sheer crushing weight of his absolute failure. He is panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the destroyed office, searching for an exit, searching for a lifeline that simply does not exist. The shaky camera holds tight on his terrified, sweat-soaked face. His chest rises and falls rapidly. The realization that he is completely powerless finally sinks into his bones. And right at that exact moment, over the sound of his ragged breathing and Sienna's muffled sobbing, a new noise cuts through the chaos. It is a sharp, authoritative sound, echoing from the hallway outside the frosted glass doors. The heavy, synchronized marching of tactical boots accompanied by the distinct static crackle of police radios. The heavy frosted glass doors do not just open. They are forcefully breached by men wearing tactical vests marked with the unmistakable bold yellow letters of the FBI and the Atlanta Police Department. Drop the weapon and put your hands behind your head right now. A booming voice commands, echoing off the shattered glass and ruined furniture. Chad freezes. The heavy crystal paperweight slips from his trembling fingers, landing on the plush rug with a dull, heavy thud. The remaining shreds of his violent bravado evaporate instantly. He raises his shaking hands into the air, his pristine cashmere sweater stained with sweat. Two uniformed officers cross the room in rapid strides. They grab his arms, twisting him around and slamming his chest flat against the cold floor-to-ceiling window he was so proudly admiring just 20 minutes ago. Through the horizontal blinds of that massive window, the harsh alternating strobe of red and blue police lights begins to pierce the room. The flashing colors wash over Chad's face, highlighting the absolute terror in his wide, bloodshot eyes. Down on the street below, a fleet of federal cruisers has effectively blockaded the entire building. A man in a sharp gray suit steps through the breached doorway, flashing a silver badge. "Special Agent Carter," I say, smoothing down the lapel of my ivory blazer. "Your timing is absolutely impeccable as always." Agent Carter gives me a brief professional nod before turning his steely gaze directly onto the man pinned against the glass. "Chad Sterling, you are under arrest," the agent announces, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. Chad presses his cheek against the glass, struggling to breathe as an officer pulls his wrist tightly behind his back. "Arrested for what?" Chad gasps, desperately trying to sound indignant, despite his compromised position. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is a private corporate matter. I am the interim CEO of the Jenkins estate." I take a slow, deliberate step toward him. The alternating red and blue lights paint my face in sharp, cinematic contrast. "You are not a CEO." "Chad," I correct him, my voice ringing with lethal precision. "You are a federal criminal. And since your expensive lawyer conveniently abandoned you to save his own skin, allow me to break down exactly what you are being charged with this morning." I tick the offenses off on my fingers, holding each one up so he can clearly see the magnitude of his destruction. First, we have federal wire fraud, I state clearly. You initiated an unauthorized international transfer of $5 million using stolen master access codes. You attempted to bypass domestic banking regulations to siphon liquid assets into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Chad shakes his head frantically against the window pane. "You cannot prove that. My lawyer executed that transfer under a legal power of attorney." "A power of attorney that brings us to charge number 2, I continue smoothly. Aggravated forgery and identity theft. You paid a corrupt notary to backdate the official seals on a fraudulent succession document. You forged my father's signature while he was resting in a hospital bed. And finally, I add, dropping my hand and stepping right into his line of sight, we have the most serious charge of all: conspiracy to commit medical tampering and attempted manslaughter. We have the crystal-clear audio recording of you offering Dr. Eris a $500,000 bribe to falsify a time of death and induce a medical coma." The blood completely drains from Chad's face. The physical realization of the audio recording hits him with the force of a wrecking ball. He knows he cannot spin his way out of an explicit recorded confession. "You set me up." Chad chokes out, tears of genuine panic finally welling in his eyes. "You planned this entire thing just to ruin me." "I did not set you up, Chad," I reply, offering him no mercy. "You set yourself up. You were so blinded by your own toxic arrogance and your desperate need to steal black wealth that you walked right into the snare. You honestly believed that you could outsmart me because I went to a local college and you went to Yale. But you forgot one crucial detail about my education. Spelman women do not just play the game. We own the board." I look over at Agent Carter and give him a slight nod. The agent gestures to the uniformed officer holding Chad. "By the way, Chad," I say, softly delivering the final crushing blow, "you might want to know that the $5 million your lawyer wired this morning did not actually go to the Cayman Islands." The moment my private security software flagged the breach at 3 o'clock this morning, I immediately contacted the Cybercrimes Division. "Agent Carter and his team have been monitoring your digital footprint all night. That wire transfer was intercepted the second it hit the clearinghouse. It was routed directly into an FBI holding account. You stole absolutely nothing. You are going to prison completely broke." The officer pulls a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. He snaps the first cuff around Chad's right wrist. The sharp metallic click echoes sharply through the destroyed office. He secures the left wrist, delivering a second definitive click. It is the most beautiful, satisfying sound I have ever heard. It is the sound of absolute justice. Chad Sterling crumbles. The weight of his staggering failure breaks his knees. His legs give out and he sags against the officers holding him upright. He begins to sob, a pathetic, broken whimpering that contains no remorse, only the miserable realization that his life of privilege and entitlement is officially over. Sienna watches her husband being dragged away from the window. She is still huddled on the white leather sofa, surrounded by broken glass and scattered legal documents. She reaches a trembling hand out toward him, but she does not call his name. She does not try to stop the police. She just watches the man she traded her family for being hauled toward the door like common trash. Chad turns his head as the officers drag him past the sofa. Sienna, he begs, his voice cracking with desperate, unhinged terror. Call my father. Call the investors. Tell them I was manipulated. Sienna, you have to save me. But Sienna just shrinks back into the cushions. She looks at the handcuffs securing his wrists, then looks at my father, who is watching the arrest with an expression of icy, unforgiving judgment. Sienna finally understands the true cost of her betrayal. She turns her face away from her husband, refusing to meet his eyes. Take him out of here, Agent Carter instructs the officers. I watch as Chad Sterling is dragged backward through the frosted glass doors, his expensive loafers scraping uselessly against the marble hallway floor. His pathetic begging cries echo down the corridor until the elevator doors finally slide shut, cutting him off completely. The flashing red and blue lights continue to pulse through the office blinds, painting a brilliant, vibrant portrait of a successfully executed war. The colonizer has been permanently removed from the premises, and the Jenkins legacy remains entirely unconditionally secure. The heavy silence that descends upon the office after the elevator doors slide shut is absolute and suffocating. The frantic, manic energy that Chad brought into the room has been entirely sucked out into the hallway, leaving behind nothing but the cold, sterile reality of the aftermath. The red and blue police lights continue their rhythmic, sweeping strobe across the vertical blinds, casting long, distorted shadows against the far wall. The air in the room feels remarkably thin, tainted with the sharp, metallic scent of nervous sweat and the lingering odor of Chad's expensive, overbearing cologne. The camera lens establishes a steady, unforgiving eye-level shot, looking slightly downward at the white leather sofa. Sienna is still huddled among the cushions, surrounded by the jagged, glittering shards of the shattered glass coffee table and the scattered, useless legal documents that were supposed to guarantee her a Parisian empire. Her black couture morning dress, meticulously selected to project an image of elegant, tragic wealth for the press, now looks like a cheap, wrinkled costume. The immaculate, expertly applied makeup she spent 2 hours perfecting this morning is completely ruined. Dark, heavy tracks of mascara streak down her pale cheeks, pooling in the corners of her trembling mouth. She stares at the empty doorway, where her husband was just dragged away in federal handcuffs. Her mind is frantically trying to process the absolute catastrophic magnitude of her new reality. She has no husband. She has no international fashion expansion. She has no access to the Jenkins estate accounts. And most devastating of all, she has no power. The invisible crown she has worn since childhood, forged by our father's unwavering favoritism and polished by her own massive ego, has been violently ripped from her head and crushed into dust. Slowly, her wide, terrified eyes shift away from the doorway. She looks past me, past the federal agents securing the perimeter, and locks onto our father. Marcus Jenkins is standing in the center of the ruined office, his posture as rigid and unyielding as a marble statue. He is not looking at her with the protective, indulgent warmth that has defined their relationship for 33 years. He is looking at her with the cold, detached scrutiny of a judge assessing a stranger who has just committed a profound, unforgivable crime against his community. Dad, Sienna whispers. The word tears from her throat, raw and trembling, sounding like the terrified plea of a lost child. She slowly slides off the edge of the white leather sofa. She does not care about her designer heels or the expensive fabric of her dress. Her knees hit the polished hardwood floor, right amidst the scattered debris. The sharp crunch of breaking glass echoes sharply in the quiet room as she physically lowers herself, collapsing onto the floor in front of him. She is literally falling to her knees, begging for salvation from the very man she was perfectly willing to bury just an hour ago. Daddy, please, you have to listen to me. Sienna cries, her voice breaking into frantic, desperate sobs. She reaches out with trembling hands, desperate to grab the hem of his tailored suit jacket, to establish physical contact, to find the safety net that has always been there to catch her. I did not know. I swear to God, I did not know the extent of what he was doing. My father takes a slow, deliberate half-step backward, ensuring her grasping fingers grasp absolutely nothing but empty air. The simple, subtle movement is a devastating rejection. Sienna gasps, her hands dropping uselessly to the floor. He manipulated me. Sienna continues to wail, her chest heaving as she tries to construct a narrative of victimhood. He told me the board was moving against us. He told me that if we did not secure the liquid assets immediately, the company would be torn apart by the shareholders. You know how little I understand about the corporate bylaws. You know I just trust the financial advisors. He used my grief against me. He used my fear against me. I stand silently by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching her desperately attempt to rewrite history. She is trying to weaponize her own deliberate ignorance, hoping that playing the naive, helpless daughter will shield her from the consequences of her treason. She expects our father to swoop in to offer her grace, to blame the wicked son-in-law for corrupting his perfect, innocent angel. But my father does not bend. The deep, heavy lines on his face seem to age him a decade in a single minute, but his eyes remain perfectly clear and brutally focused. You did not shed a single tear of grief today, Sienna. My father says, his voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal disappointment that cuts far deeper than any screaming match ever could. His baritone voice fills every corner of the room, stripping away her excuses layer by layer. Do not sit there on my floor and dare to invoke the word grief. I watched you scroll through a catalog for designer veils while my supposed corpse was sitting in a hospital morgue. I watched you actively complain about the inconvenience of my death to your social calendar. I was in shock. Sienna sobs, bowing her head toward the floor, her tears leaving dark spots on the polished wood. I was not thinking straight. I just wanted to make you proud. I wanted the Paris expansion to be a tribute to the Jenkins name. I wanted to show the world that we were a global family. My father shakes his head, an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust washing over his features. You do not care about the Jenkins name, he replies, his words landing like heavy rhythmic blows. You care about the lifestyle the Jenkins name affords you. You wanted Paris. You wanted European distributors. You wanted the validation of an elite social circle that secretly despises you. And you were perfectly willing to sell the very ground your grandfather bled for to get it. He looks down at her kneeling form, the visual embodiment of her complete moral and financial bankruptcy. Chad did not force you to sign those papers. Sienna, my father continues, refusing to give her an inch of absolution. He did not put a gun to your head. He offered you 30 pieces of silver, and you eagerly took it without a single moment of hesitation. You knew exactly what the Vanguard Group intended to do to Cascade Heights. You knew they were going to bulldoze the community that built this family. You did not care about the history, and you certainly did not care about me. You only cared about cashing the check before the bank closed. Please, Sienna begs, looking up at him with ruined, bloodshot eyes. Please, I will do anything. I will go to rehabilitation. I will go to counseling. I will make a public apology to the board. Just do not cut me off. Do not leave me with nothing. He took everything, Dad. If you turn your back on me now, I will not survive this. The entire room holds its breath. This is the critical defining moment of our family's history. For 33 years, Marcus Jenkins has never once let his eldest daughter fall. He has paid her debts, covered her scandals, and funded her vanity. My father looks down at the crying, broken woman kneeling among the shattered glass. He takes a long, slow breath, steadying his own breaking heart. You are right about one thing, Sienna, my father says softly, his voice devoid of any remaining warmth or paternal affection. You have absolutely nothing. He does not reach down to help her up. He does not offer a handkerchief. He does not offer a single word of comfort. With agonizing, brutal finality, Marcus Jenkins slowly turns his back on his golden child. He pivots away from her kneeling form, facing the massive glass windows overlooking the city he built. The physical turning of his back is the ultimate undeniable confirmation of her isolation. It is the absolute death of her privilege. Sienna lets out a loud, gut-wrenching wail of pure agony, burying her face into her hands as she collapses fully against the hardwood floor. Her sobs echo through the sterile corporate office, but my father does not turn around. The emotional severing is complete. The golden child has been permanently dethroned, leaving her to choke on the bitter ashes of her own phenomenal greed. The visual style of the scene abruptly shifts. The agonizing, suffocating silence of the corporate office shatters into a rapid-fire, adrenaline-fueled montage. The camera accelerates, cutting sharply from one high-stakes location to the next in a seamless, relentless sequence of absolute justice. The first shot is a blinding flurry of camera flashes outside the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. Chad Sterling is being frog-marched up the concrete steps by two federal agents. His custom-tailored morning suit is wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. He is desperately trying to hide his face behind his handcuffed wrists, but the local and national news syndicates are absolutely merciless. The camera cuts rapidly to a cramped, dingy holding cell inside the federal building. Chad is furiously pacing the concrete floor, clutching a standard-issue plastic telephone receiver to his ear. He is using his one guaranteed phone call. He dials the private unlisted number of his father, Arthur Sterling, the patriarch of the supposedly elite Connecticut hedge fund. Chad expects the cavalry to arrive. He expects a fleet of high-powered corporate defense attorneys to descend upon Atlanta and bail him out using the family's vast resources. The camera instantly cross-cuts to a sprawling, heavily guarded estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Arthur Sterling sits behind a massive mahogany desk, a crystal glass of expensive scotch resting near his hand. He looks down at his glowing smartphone. The caller ID clearly displays a collect call from a federal detention center in Fulton County, Georgia. Arthur does not look concerned. He looks entirely disgusted. With a slow, deliberate movement, Arthur Sterling reaches out and taps the red button declining the call. He physically severs his son from the family bloodline with a single swipe of his finger. The montage speeds up, fueled by the relentless ticking of the legal clock. We see front-page headlines flashing across the screen. National financial networks pick up the story, their bold chyrons broadcasting the spectacular failure of Chad Sterling. The media exposes the entire plot. They detail how an arrogant, over-leveraged hedge fund heir attempted to steal a historic black commercial district to cover his family's catastrophic margin calls, only to be entirely outsmarted by a black female private equity CEO who owned the very shell company he sold the assets to. The narrative paints Chad as a monumental, historic idiot. The camera cuts to a live press conference broadcast on a major news network. Arthur Sterling stands at a podium surrounded by his remaining crisis management team. He is actively performing damage control to prevent the total liquidation of his hedge fund. He looks directly into the news cameras and publicly loudly disowns his son. He claims Chad acted as a complete rogue agent, driven by personal greed and mental instability. Arthur formally renounces Chad, stating that the Sterling family will not provide a single cent for his legal defense or post his bail. A sharp cut brings the camera back to Chad inside the holding cell. He is staring at a small, static-filled television mounted in the upper corner of the room. He watches his own father throw him directly to the wolves on national television. The reality of his situation hits him like a physical blow. His white privilege, his Ivy League degree, and his family name have completely evaporated. He is entirely financially stranded. He has no bail money. He has no high-priced defense team. He is left sitting in a cold room with a tired, overworked public defender who drops a massive stack of federal indictments onto the metal table between them. The montage bleeds into the actual federal trial, moving with a fast, rhythmic precision that showcases the absolute slaughter of Chad's legal defense. There are no drawn-out dramatic courtroom monologues. There is only cold, hard, undeniable evidence. The camera flashes to the prosecution playing the crystal-clear audio recording of Chad offering a $500,000 bribe to the corrupt doctor. We see the jury members shaking their heads in sheer disgust. The camera cuts to the prosecution, projecting the forged power of attorney documents side by side with my father's authentic signature. We see the handwriting experts systematically destroying any shadow of a doubt. We see Chad sitting at the defense table, his face buried in his hands, his posture completely broken. He tries to argue duress. He tries to argue that he was just trying to protect the Jenkins estate from market volatility. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar entitlement, simply glares at him over her reading glasses, entirely unswayed by his pathetic victim routine. The camera pans to the gallery, finding me sitting in the front row, right next to my father. We are wearing impeccably tailored suits projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable dignity. I do not gloat. I do not smirk. I just watch the wheels of justice grind Chad Sterling into fine powder. The rapid cuts build to a final resounding climax. The judge strikes her heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block. The sharp crack echoes through the courtroom, signifying the absolute end of the line. She does not offer a slap on the wrist. She does not offer country club rehabilitation. She sentences Chad Sterling to 10 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The camera tracks Chad as the heavy steel handcuffs are locked around his wrists one last time. He turns around to look at the gallery, his eyes frantically searching for a friendly face, a lifeline, a shred of sympathy. He finds absolutely nothing. His family is not there. Sienna is not there. He looks at me, and I give him a slow, deliberate nod of farewell. The final sequence of the montage strips away the last remnants of his former life. We see Chad trading his designer clothing for a bright, coarse orange jumpsuit. We hear the harsh metallic slam of heavy prison doors echoing down a long concrete cell block. The camera pushes through the steel bars framing Chad as he sits alone on a thin, uncomfortable mattress. He stares blankly at the gray cinderblock wall. He has zero commissary money. He receives no visitors. He is completely isolated, left to rot in a cage of his own making. Forced to spend the next decade remembering the exact moment he underestimated the wrong woman. The camera transitions from the cold steel of the federal penitentiary to the harsh fluorescent lighting of a mid-tier department store in suburban Atlanta. The visual style changes drastically. The shots are no longer dynamic or sweeping. They are steady, grounded, and painfully mundane, perfectly mirroring the crushing reality of Sienna's new existence. We track her as she stands behind a brightly lit cosmetic counter, wearing a stiff, aggressively unflattering black uniform. Her plastic name tag is slightly crooked. She is forcefully scrubbing a smudge of cheap foundation off the glass display case with a ragged paper towel. Sienna avoided a federal prison sentence because Chad, in a desperate and pathetic attempt to secure her loyalty for a future appeal, took the entire fall. He swore to the presiding judge that his wife had absolutely zero knowledge of the wire fraud. But evading a concrete cell did not mean she evaded justice. My father officially severed her from the family trust. He legally dissolved her safety net, canceled every single platinum credit card in her wallet, and evicted her from the Buckhead penthouse with exactly 2 hours to pack a single suitcase. Worse still, because Sienna eagerly co-signed all of Chad's fraudulent credit applications to fund her Paris fashion delusion, she is now legally responsible for a mountain of unsecured debt. A customer drops a plastic shopping basket full of discount makeup onto the glass counter, startling Sienna out of her thoughts. The camera stays fixed at eye level, forcing the audience to witness her profound public humiliation. "Are you going to ring this up or just stare at it?" the customer snaps impatiently. Sienna stiffens. The old entitled arrogance flares up in her eyes for a split second before the crushing weight of poverty pushes it back down. She forces a tight, agonizing smile and begins scanning the items. Her hands, once adorned with massive, sparkling diamonds, are now completely bare. She had to pawn her wedding ring just to afford the security deposit on a tiny, poorly maintained studio apartment located 3 tedious bus transfers away from the upscale neighborhoods she used to rule. "That will be $42.50, Sienna mutters, keeping her eyes glued to the cash register screen. The customer swipes her card, then pauses, peering closely at Sienna's face. "Wait a minute," the woman says, her tone dripping with sudden malicious recognition. "You are Marcus Jenkins's daughter, the one who tried to steal his company. I saw your husband crying on the local news. What happened to your fancy Paris fashion line?" Sienna's face burns a dark, humiliated crimson. She hands the customer her printed receipt, her hands trembling violently under the harsh lights. "Have a wonderful day, ma'am," Sienna whispers, her voice completely devoid of its former power. She watches the woman walk away laughing. Sienna sinks back against the cosmetic display, utterly trapped in a lifelong prison that has absolutely no bars. She traded a legacy of generational wealth and unconditional family love for a cheap illusion, and now she will spend the rest of her miserable life paying retail price for her profound treason. The camera begins a slow, deliberate pull-out shot, gliding backward through the heavy oak doors of the Jenkins estate boardroom. The frantic, desperate energy of the hostile takeover attempt has been entirely eradicated. The room is now bathed in the warm, golden light of late afternoon. I am sitting directly at the head of the massive mahogany table, occupying the custom leather chairman seat that now legally and officially belongs to me. I smooth my hands over the polished wood, absorbing the profound, silent victory of this moment. Cascade Heights was never sold to a predatory developer. Instead, I absorbed the Vanguard Group holdings directly into the primary Jenkins estate portfolio. We injected $20 million of clean, verified capital straight into the historic district. We did not bulldoze a single brick of our heritage. We meticulously restored the original storefronts and transformed the surrounding block into a massive, state-of-the-art incubator strictly for Black-owned tech startups and local entrepreneurs. My grandfather once stood on those exact porches to protect our community's economic future during the darkest days of segregation. I am making absolutely certain that his sanctuary stands as a beacon of Black excellence for the next 100 years. My father, Marcus Jenkins, officially stepped down as chairman of the board this morning. He did not retire out of medical necessity or corporate pressure. He retired out of pure, unadulterated peace. He is currently sitting on the veranda of his private estate, drinking his dark roast coffee and watching the sailboats on the lake. He is resting easily, knowing with absolute certainty that his life's work is permanently secured in the hands of the daughter who actually earned the right to defend it. I set my architectural blueprints down on the desk, fold my hands together, and look directly into the camera lens. The slow pull-out shot stops, locking me perfectly in the center of the frame. Society loves to constantly remind us that family is absolutely everything. They tell you that blood is thicker than water, that you have to endlessly forgive toxic behavior, simply because you share the same last name. But biology does not automatically grant anyone unconditional loyalty. A shared bloodline does not give a single person the right to use your existence as a stepping stone to feed their own massive ego. True family is an action. It is mutual respect. It is fiercely protecting one another. When the people who are supposed to love you decide to throw you to the wolves to save their own skin, you do not sit in the snow and cry over the profound betrayal. You do not shrink yourself to beg for their approval. You let them throw you. You walk straight into the dark woods, you learn exactly how to hunt in the shadows, and you come back leading the entire pack. That is exactly how I taught my family a permanent, devastating lesson about the brutal cost of greed. Now it is your turn. Have you ever had to face down toxic relatives who severely underestimated your power? Tell me your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about claiming